And then boom, 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 boom. It got broken like 20 times in a course of 2 years, you know? And that's continued because people see like, oh, well, this is possible, you know?
Yeah.
And that draws people into being interested in that type of training. And then they realize like, oh, there's a venue where I could become popular based on this special skill set I have. So of course people are going to, when they realize, oh, I could be good at this. And now with the internet.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about that iceberg, because that's a great analogy. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. My guest today is Swede Burns. He was on episode 41 and 124, the creator of the Fifth Set, which I can say is a program, a book, and a certification. Owner of, Keyhole Barbell, 2016 Powerlifting Coach of the Year, and father, husband, and lives in the church.
That's right.
So
yeah.
we'll just... I think the place to probably start this off would be for those that don't know the Fifth Set. I don't want to sit here and say, hey, go watch episode 41 and get caught up.
Yeah.
So just a summary of what it is, and we'll kind of branch out from there.
Yeah. So just a high level overview.
Yeah.
Fifth Set is a methodology for training and competition. It was designed specifically for the sport of powerlifting. With that said, it's definitely externally applicable to a number of other sports, and I've used it with a ton of other athletes, even from high school to college to pro athletes, all over the place, the whole spectrum of populations. Essentially, it's like conjugate in a sense, very different in some other senses, but it's a concurrent form of periodization. So in that sense, it's similar to conjugate, meaning that we're training multiple capacities in one cycle. Typically. Now, the difference is that the capacity that we're training will shift. The focus will shift throughout the course of a macro cycle, which is a series of mesocycles. So whereas in the beginning, we're doing a lot more volume, further out from a meet, lower percentage work. As we get closer to the meet, we move more into sport specific stuff, even doing heavy singles, even during a peaking cycle towards the end. See, typically the way it will work is there's 3 successive mesocycles that are gradually becoming more and more similar to competition in terms of how the training goes. And then there's a peaking cycle at the end, which is very similar, almost identical to competition, so much so that we'll even have pauses and commands worked into the training. Whereas most of the year, we don't do any of that stuff. So that's a high level overview. In terms of like what the specifics are, what it looks like, the namesake Fifth Set comes from, there are various protocols within the method, and one of them is the Fifth Set protocol. Now there's a couple of versions of that. There's like the 75% Fifth Set protocol, the 80% Fifth Set protocol, and those all involve the Fifth Set being an AMRAP, like as many reps as possible. And everybody's heard me harp on about this. If you've ever heard me talk, we say AMRAP, but I really mean AMGRAP, like as many good reps as possible. When you get to where there's technical breakdown, that's typically where we will cut the set. And those are the rules or recommendations for the method. So ideally, we're going to have somebody take a compound lift as close to failure as possible with a given percentage, with incremental increases per microcycle, and then cut it there. And then the objective is to incrementally add weight, throughout the course of that mesocycle. There's a prescribed percentage to start a mesocycle, and then there are incremental increases with some rules in place to make sure people don't go wildly off the rails. Because especially any percentage method, I know you run into this. People they put their hopes and dreams. That's what they want as that'll be their training max, like what they hope to get one day, and not what they can actually. Oh, I know, but they can actually do.
Is the AMRAP kind of a guide though to kind of help them to know if they are within RPE? I guess that you're looking for.
So we don't really use RPE in that sense, but we do actually, I'll get to that in a little bit, kind of with some of the other stuff that we do. But for that, no, we have a rep max method. So all this stuff's outlined in the books and the coaching manual and stuff. And obviously it's to the point that we have a certification course with it. But there's something that we use for new people. Like, so when I'm onboarding new people, right? Rather than have them just work up to a max or or tell me some lift that in their head they thought was good,
Yeah.
I have them take I just typically will say like something that you think you could definitely get 4 reps with, but then like work up to that weight with triples and then take that for as many reps as possible and like just go until you're not going to get another rep and then rack it. So then that takes out the hopes and dreams. We have some kind of real world figure. Now it could be, if they've been beating the shit out of themselves in training for the last 6 months straight, then there's some inhibition, some defensive inhibition. So they'll have like a artificially reduced max, because they won't have the ability to express their level of strength at that point because they're carrying so much central fatigue. But it's okay to start with it a little bit low. It's still, there's such a range there that it's kind of hard to mess up. It's guardrails for people that love to do dumb stuff in the gym.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is if it's like a conjugate type of program, then you have max effort exercises, which in time can kind of gauge where your actual max is without having to max out. So then adjustments can be made if it's on, a dynamic speed cycle based upon percents. And because the limitation of percents with beginners is there is linear progression, but there's also like this crazy step progression to where maybe they fix a little bit of technique on one area and now they're 50 pounds stronger.
Way stronger.
Where if they're just on a basic linear program, they're kind of handcuffed in a way with that because there's nothing to really gauge. This is now stronger outside of everything just got a lot easier to be able to do.
Right. So we do have some sort of stopgaps in place in that respect, but they're more on the other direction than what you're referring to. Where you seem like you're talking about like a concern with people getting too strong, like they're to where the training max becomes irrelevant that they've been using, right?
Yeah.
Our stopgaps are more like we have something on the other end, which is that if you don't get enough reps, and we call that failing out, right? And that is actually a sign that, assuming that the training max you're working with is legit, if you're not able to get a minimum number of repetitions on a fifth set with that percentage, that's a sign that you're cooked. That's a sign that we need to deload earlier than prescribed, which we do include rigid programmed deloads. But as far as going the other direction, no, because of the fact that it's only 2 months each cycle and then we reboot, right? Like, so I've found that I can take absolute beginners, run them through older versions of the method, sort of like the first book that we sold here on the site, like years ago, like almost 10 years ago. Right.
Decade.
That was meant to be like, I think a lot of people misunderstood that book. That was meant to be like, to get people like as an on-ramp into powerlifting, to compete in the sport of powerlifting. The whole purpose of that. And I mean, I made this clear in the coaching manual, like, cause I put the disambiguation of versions in the beginning. So people are clear that like, that is meant for people that want to try to coach themselves and want to, what is powerlifting? I want to do it. And it's everything that you need in that book, soup to nuts, like from never having touched a bar to doing a real training cycle to doing a peaking cycle to selecting attempts that are legitimate attempts that aren't going to make you look like a fool or ruin your day on the powerlifting meet. So there's like, formulas for everything. I made it as simple as possible. People at some point tried to pick it apart later on. And if you take it for what it is, I think it's a wonderful system. It's just so easy to use. It's very minimal in terms of what the stuff you have, the decisions you have to make as a new person that's newer to competition. And even that method did really well with lots of people that were more experienced and higher level competitors. I mean, that's what Ellen did for like 6 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without getting, now she does the other stuff. She's into the more advanced stuff. But I always say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you have something that can work in a simpler version, why not continue to use the simpler version? Overcomplication for its own sake is no good.
Well, there's no such thing as a perfect person, and there's no such thing as a perfect program. So anybody can take any program and pick it apart so you can find, because it's a 12-week program that's not individualized, trying to do the best to be able to have factors in there. Yeah. To be able to help with the guide rails, like what you were talking about, where, and you kind of touched on it. The other big thing that happens is the rapid progression usually already has happened before they're going to get a hold of this set or any other type of thing. But on the other end of that can come into issues that I've run into. I'm sure you did when you were years ago still competing, where you're tripling more than the gym than you can do in a meet, just because things are going well.
Just over
it's
time.
These triples are easy as hell. Instead of jumping 20 pounds the next week, because this is easy, I'm going to jump 25 or 30.
And that's especially true when it's like a technique issue. Like when you see big technique changes and then suddenly somebody's like able to lift 50 more pounds than they could like the same day earlier. You know what I mean? It's not that they got stronger. It's that they learned how to do the movement correctly, or something clicked.
Well, that's a huge thing.
Moment. And that does it. You're right. It happens a lot. I definitely run into that a lot. Like, especially with beginner populations, people that don't have a high training age, you know what I mean? That haven't been in the gym for 10, 15, 20 years,
Well, you've done hundreds of seminars as well. And you can have somebody in a seminar and just fix a couple things and they accidentally break their PR by 30 or 40 pounds.
Left and right. That's happened more times than I can count.
And
a minor thing.
And you have to remind them you didn't get stronger. You just displayed the strength that you already had in a more efficient manner.
You also have to tell them, like, I'm not a wizard. It's not like something I did that was magic. You can do this at home. You just have to remember what I told you. Like whatever it is, reaching for the bar with your chest or setting up correctly so that you're getting transfer from the legs on a bench press. Things like that. I mean, these are minor changes. Another issue that you're sort of like started to touch on is beginners, I feel, they have another type of artificial ceiling on their strength, which comes from a lack of stability, right? Rather than they're not strong, they could be strong, they're just not developed enough. So those people tend to fail for very different reasons than people like you and me that are already developed and have been training for, decades. We fail for neurological reasons. We can't recruit enough motor units quickly enough to finish the lift before we are cooked, right? So they tend to fail, like that underdeveloped population, for lack of a better term. They tend to fail because they can't maintain technique throughout the course of the lift because of instability in joints. So like people that are underdeveloped, you can see when they have like a small back, small shoulders, things that are just like markers of strength. You know what I mean? Like they have no traps and no lats. You can see somebody right away and tell, like, okay, you're going to have trouble bench pressing, even though those aren't the prime movers in bench press. If you're going to be really limited because you're going to lose a shoulder early on. So what ends up happening is we do the training max, like I told you, where they do a rep max method, right? And then I have a coefficient chart in the book. What weight did you do times? And then you go down, okay, I got 7 reps. And then that sets your max. For you and me, that works great. For somebody with experience, that works great. For a beginner, when they're failing sometimes with 10 pounds more than they could get for 10 reps. You know what I mean? But like, that's never going to be the case for us, right? So, because they're not stable enough to execute the lift. So when they're failing because they lose a scat, things like that. So in those cases, I find that what that'll do is their AMRAP is going to be high. It's going to be a high number. It'll be like 12, 15 or more sometimes, because of the fact that they have an artificially low training max and that percentage is less than that even. But that's what they need. That stability and that grease in the groove is developed by going through the motions with the movements that we're gonna try to develop, right? So I've always said that. I think the best assistance movement for bench press is bench press. Right? Like for squat.
Well, we'll reinforce the technique as well. Because the percentages are a weird thing. And when I was still working as a personal trainer, there was a female soccer player with maybe a year, 2 years training experience, not a whole lot, but not really weight training oriented. And because she was young, I'm going to make excuses on why I just had her do stupid shit, because I wanted to have her do stupid shit, because it's essentially what it comes down to. I was just intrigued and wanted to know how many repetitions would she be able to get with 80%, you know, on a squat. It was a box squat, but just a tap, you know, so not a full box squat, but just to make some consistency.
To measure range of motion.
Yeah, to measure range of motion.
Right.
And it was like 20 reps. Not a big weight. I mean, the top weight might have been like 115, drops to 80% to 20 reps. And I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, okay, now if I had 80% of my 1 rep max, I'm like, I get like 5. You know, it was something ridiculous. But that shows that discrepancy, you know, between that beginner.
Me too. Like, and that's where I'm at. I would get like 5, 6.
Yeah. Yes.
And I might get 5 or 6 on micro 1. Right, with 80%, and then by micro, I'm still getting 5. You know, and you've added 20, 25 pounds. You know what I mean?
Yes,
I'm still able to get right in that range, because that's where we fail. Like for neuromuscular reasons, like for motor unit recruitment reasons, that's a true strength failure. You know, it's not like where we can't hold the stability together anymore, because typically at a certain point you stop failing because you can't hold it together anymore.
Yes.
You know, on the rep work at least. And then you start to fail because it's just not, you're just cooked. Your ability to recruit motor units is cooked. Now in a meet, those same things show back up. Like you do, you never see somebody fail on a squat because their legs are cooked. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's their upper back. It's that they come out of bar path. The same thing on bench press. It's very rarely do you see someone get to the point where they're just in a perfect position. Typically what happens is they lose a shoulder. You know, one of those scaps starts to come, and then that's it. Then from there, it's like, you might as well take it.
Or lost it on the way down.
Yeah, or lost it on the way down. Yeah, exactly.
Either way, it still kind of fall into, most of the time, being a stability issue from the standpoint of not able to isometrically hold that position that you need to be able to hold for that duration with that weight.
And that touches on something else that's an important part of why those people fail, is because of, it's like, I refer to it as movement specific hypertrophy, right? So like you need to develop those muscles the way they're going to be used in the movement, right? Because that's the only way you can be certain that you're going to be, like, if you want to be sure that you're able to stabilize your upper back during a bench press, you better be handling a decent amount of volume stabilized in the bench press. You know what I mean? Like, sure, you can do pull-ups, you can do rows, you can do shrugs, you can do throat pulls, you can do a million other exercises, but none of those have the dynamic correspondence of the bench press itself. You know what I'm saying? So going through that with all the exercises, all the movements that you're going to use in competition. Now, there's something to be said for variation too, you know? I just think that should be a secondary thing. And so the way we run the method now, and have run it for maybe the last 8 years, or even maybe a little more than that. Gosh, it's probably been about 7, 8 years that we run it like this, where we have, there's a periodized type of model. You know, I've used that with all my clients for a long time, because I'm steering, you know, but in the books, it was easier to do things slightly differently. In the beginning, the first book was super simple. The second one, Evolutions, which was like just a adjunct to the first book. It was meant to, like, here's a little more info. And then the coaching manual was basically the summary of everything, like a high level, and then also all the specifics, so you could see really what was happening when I work with people. And yeah, it was good. It was useful for a number of reasons, because people began to understand, oh, he is actually talking about a mesocycle. Like, where before they're like, why are you calling them mesocycles if it's the same thing? And it's like, well, you're only seeing this part, but it is still a mesocycle. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, the smallest repeating cycle is still a microcycle. You know what I mean? And a series of mesocycles is still a macrocycle. I just wasn't periodizing it the way that people are typically used to. Yeah. I do things a little differently now. And the thing is, like, I wrote an article for you guys probably probably like 9 years ago about not being too rigid and dogmatic with the things that you believe. Because when you do, you're done learning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're done learning, you're done improving. And like, I still am changing opinions on things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I'm still, as I work with different groups and more, just larger amounts of people, you know, over my career, I still am refining opinions about things and recommendations that I give. Now, there's really not, it's not dramatic changes, but there are things that I think are, like, I've actually gone on to now, one of the things we were talking about before, hypertrophy. I do more specific hypertrophy earlier in the macro cycle, right? So like, I found that it's worth it to take a mesocycle or two for most people. And honestly, for anyone that is not, like, I've kind of set up some rules because I wanted to integrate this into the CERT course that I do for the method, for coaching the method. And so I'm like, okay, well, I need something that everybody's going to be able to understand. So I started to come up with, you know, rules, right? Because that's basically what's a methodology. It's just a series of rules. So I started coming up with, okay, well, what population needs this, you know? And I realized anyone who is not completely developed, like if you can honestly stand in front of the mirror, get on the scale and assess yourself and say, okay, I don't need to be any more muscular to reach my strength goals. Like, okay, that's a very small amount of people, right? Like you're talking about very tiny margin of competitors, right? Most people know they need to get bigger, right? But they rather just focus on trying to get stronger like next week or in 6 months, you know? Whereas if you take a period of time and set it aside and dedicate it to that hypertrophy, the likelihood that you're going to reach your goal is way higher, you know, in a shorter period of time, if you're being realistic. It's always the case that when people try to rush things, it ends up taking longer. You know, you get injured, whatever else, you know, and this is no exception. So what I've been doing is for people that fit into the category that they aren't at the level of development they need to be, and that's a self-assessment. You know, you can honestly, I'll leave that to the part. Do you think you're as jacked as you need to be to lift the weights you want to lift? Because if not, then that leads right in. So it's not even a negotiation because you already decided that you agree with me. Then you need to do 2 out of every 3 mesocycles per macro, right? So like maybe they're called the hypertrophy. They're called foundations of hypertrophy. That's what we're calling them. So like you would do meso 1, meso 2 of that, and then move into either the sequence system or the old school meso 3, which is very similar to competition and prepares you for a peaking cycle, right? So that's about a 6-month commitment. You try that once, like you're going to see you're more jacked. Of course, there's other stuff that goes along with hypertrophy training. Like you have to eat. So you have to sleep. That's the biggest thing. You have to sleep. I'll say that like 6 more times because nobody sleeps. If you talk to the average person that lifts that wants to ask advice and stuff, first thing I say, how many hours sleep you get a night? It's usually like, 5 or 6, but you don't understand. Like, it's my job. It's like, I understand. Like, I'm busy. I sleep 9 hours because it's my number one priority. Now, there's times I don't. Like when we were at that thing for Jeff, I got like 6 hours sleep. Last night, I probably got 7 hours sleep. But 90% of the time, I'm nailing on my CPAP in the morning. I'm nailing over 9 hours because I go to bed early enough that I'm like, okay, if I got to lay there before I fall asleep, you know, and you get various techniques to do that. So you have to have that in check. Diet, you have to be in a caloric surplus if you expect to put muscle on. That's not to say it's impossible to make major body composition changes without doing cycles of cutting and bulking, but that's definitely the easiest way. Like one example would be Ellen. She's a 132. She went from like 9 years ago, like she was impressively strong, but she didn't even look like she lifted, you know? Now she's right in the same range of body weight. But dude, she has like cannonball deltoids and she's jacked. And that was just progressively very slow over a period of time. And her biggest thing is sleep. The one thing I never have to argue with her about is the woman sleeps. She's like, for anyone that doesn't know, Ellen Stein is 71 years old and still totaling over $1,000 raw. Right? Like little, and she's a 132. And she like walks around at 133. So it's not like she's doing big cuts to get to 132. But, and she's never had a significant swing in her body weight to make that huge gain in muscularity to where like she's unrecognizable in terms of the amount of muscle she carries. And it's reflected in her numbers too. You know, she's much more stable. She's benching over 200 pounds consistently. I think she'll bench 225 in her 70s, which is crazy.
Yeah.
As a woman, you know, think of that. It's kind of bonkers to even say that out loud, but I think she will. She's done 215. And like her training now is outstanding. Now, with that said, like I'm laying all that stuff out. So you realize like she is the farthest right of the bell curve. So is it possible? Yeah. It's also possible to total 1,000 pounds in your 70s as a woman that weighs 132 pounds. Is it likely that you're going to fit into that category? No. So that's not what I generalize based on. You know what I mean? What somebody who's an absolute genetic freak can do. For the average person, you're going to have to take time and put weight on. Like me, over 2020, I was doing great with squat. Like it took center stage for me again. It was like, now I can't, you know, I need a shoulder replacement at this point. I've been doing this forever. You know, I took my first personal training job in 1998, you know, like a long time. And I've been really grinding since then. There's never been an extended period that I wasn't really training as hard as I could. So it's hard for me to, I can't get a bar on my back to squat with a straight bar anymore. So I have to like, you know, so what do we do to keep our head in the game? I remember another time we were having a conversation and you called it innocent lifts. So I was like, that got under my skin a little bit. You know what I mean? Because I was like, it is an innocent lift. So I had to find a way to make it more dangerous. Just keep putting weight on, you know? And over 2020, that was like during all the shutdowns and all that stuff. That was like, because, you know, my gym's connected to my house. Like you were saying, I live in an old church. I have a 3,000 square foot gym in the house. So they couldn't stop me from training. Yeah. So I was training regularly. And in fact, I was squatting like 3 times a week. And I got extremely strong, you know. I got really strong. I got up to where like I was doing 7 plates, you know, which is kind of insanity with the safety squat bar, you know. And for like sets for volume, like running a model of fist set that involved a high volume day where I would do like 5 plates and sets of 5, and then however many on the AMRAP, and then like 6, and then add. So that was constantly progressing, starting with 6 plates up to more and more. There's a video of me like falling and catching it somehow on my Instagram where I started convulsing with all that weight on there. I don't know how that didn't mess my back up, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, so I was like, I realized that's something I could do. So that's kind of the goal that I'm working on now. And I realized I did the same exact advice that I'm giving you right now, anybody listening. And I knew I had to put on more muscle to get back to where I was to be able to do that stuff, right? So if I want to beat those numbers, and it's something that I think is still within my, you know, within my grasp, it's within striking distance, you know, I knew I needed to put more muscle back on, you know, and my priority. Here is the Foundations Mesocycle 1, which is the Foundations of Hypertrophy. This is actually a new product that we're going to have. I believe we're going to sell it on the site here. So this is an overview and the breakdown of instructions, everything you need to know for that. But now we're going to work on picking your first movement. So for the chest triceps day, which will take the place of your normal first bench day. And all this stuff works on the same framework as the normal fist set microcycles, so and meso and macrocycles. So they're 9-day micros. They fit into the normal mesos. The mesos fit into a normal macro. So you can just run meso 3 from the sequence system after running both of these, and you'll be able to hit you know, without a hitch. Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. So you were saying you had issues with incline.
Yes. Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link.
He's changed for a little bit in the interim. You know, I got married. My second kid is on the way. Boy, by the way, about to be a boy dad. Thank God for that. But I decided that it's time to start, you know, leading from the front a little more and making that a priority. Having a training goal myself, having training goals myself. So I want to get back to beyond that. I'd like to squat 800 pounds with that SSB, you know, the same depth, the same way that I'm doing everything now. And I know that in order to do that, I had to get my weight back up. So I took, for the last 4 months, I've been running the foundations of hypertrophy stuff, those beginning things, you know. So even me, late in my career here, I'm like 26 years into competing, probably 30 something years into training. I still realize, okay, there's still a valid use. I can put muscle on pretty quickly. So within that time, I went from 240, something like that, to I gotta be near 280 right now. Somebody's probably gonna run up and pull a scale out. You know, that's the new thing. What's up with that? As a sidebar,
I have no idea,
dude. That's like mind-boggling to me.
Scale
some little wiener runs up, like, "What do you weigh?" And then, oh, you get over how tall?
Height and weight.
Yeah, how tall?
Yeah.
They should do that to me. Because I mean, why would I lie about that? It's the stupidest thing ever. We'll have to do it. I'll take a video of it. I saw you had a scale over there. I'll jump on it.
Yeah.
That, and then the other thing that cracks me up is I see these dudes running up to people like who are obvious non-tested competitors in various sports, like Olympia competitors in bodybuilding, and they're saying like, "So do you use steroids?" Like, what is this new game where these like wiener streamer kids are going up to people and like asking them, do they break the law on camera? Yeah. Like, what? I can't even imagine something. Can you imagine something like that happened like 15 years ago? Like, especially at the Arnold, they probably already got drug out by their feet. Yeah. You know, it's a different world. It's a different world, but that's kind of off topic, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty funny.
So with the hypertrophy phases that you're laying out, what happens with the big three? Are they used for hypertrophy, or are they pulled out and replaced with other movements?
So, and you're touching on a very important psychological topic here. Could you pull them out? Absolutely. You know, and that's one. So what I do is on these templates, which are, I'm going to sell them individually as templates, and each template has like, I realize that I like to write books, but like powerlifters don't really like to read. Most of us can't read very well. So I end up just reiterating 10 things out of the book 1,000 times a day on the internet. Or like when I put up the question boxes, which like sometimes I can't even tolerate to put the boxes up because it's just the same 10, 12, 20 questions again and again and again. And I'm like, you know, it's dude, it literally is. It's mind numbing to continue to answer the same questions again and again and again. I think we talked about this one time. I actually wrote an article about it like a million years ago. You can coach 1,000 people in your career, more even, but you only answer like 50 questions, right? It's the same questions again and again and again and again and again. And I've sort of trailed off from the question you just asked me. I'm sorry, I totally lost it. What was it?
The main lifts during the hypertrophy phase.
Okay, so skirt. Back on topic here. So I give people the option, because on these templates, the way I have it laid out, I give people options for the movements, right? So essentially you're getting a protocol, and then you'll have something that fits into a given box. Like it might be that you're replacing deadlifts with RDL. It's pretty similar to a deadlift, you know what I mean? Right? But what we're doing is a little different. So the way you're approaching the lift is different because we're doing controlled eccentrics, right? The focus is different. We're not using a percentage. So that's different. That's kind of what, when you brought up the idea of RPE, that's what I was hinting at, is that, yeah, there is actually a way that we use something similar to that, but that's just a starting point. Very similar to how on the rep max method, it's a starting point when I say, hey, what do you think you can definitely get for 4 reps? And then a lot of times dudes get 8 reps with that, which is a whole nother issue in itself, that people have no idea what they're actually capable of doing. So when you tell people to train to failure, you know, I'll get to that too, because that's kind of explicitly relevant to what we're talking about here. So they'll pick a movement, and it might be like, it'll say RDL, it'll be, give them a couple different movements that are essentially the same idea. And one of the options will still be deadlift for people that are just mental midgets. You know what I mean? Like, cause you can still, okay, if you still want to, like, you really just want to do slow, slow eccentric deadlifts? Like, okay, yeah. It's almost better to pick a different lift because it changes the movement pattern a little bit for the competition lift when you try to, like, when you're training it in a different way, when you're slowing things down a little bit on the eccentric, you know? So, because then you get in the habit of doing that, and that's the last thing you want to do, at least for, like, say, a raw bench press. You don't want to you don't want to bring that down slow. You know what I mean? It's, you're not going to get it. You want that because, you know, it's a matter of physics. It's not even really debatable. As fast as you can control it, that's what I say. You know, because then you have more kinetic energy that will be reversed. Even if there's a pause, it takes a little bit for that kinetic energy to dissipate, you know? So without getting too far off of that, for, like, these are rare times. This is the only example of times that I'm going to give people as main lifts or as the most important lift for the day, something that we're not actually doing in the competition. You know, because, you know me, I'm somebody who, like, specificity is like a linchpin of my system, and it just gets more. It doesn't get less specific. It just gets more specific, you know, to the point where, like, you're basically doing a powerlifting meet or part of one, you know, for the last training, the heaviest training days, you know, and this is very different from that. It's a major departure, but I think it's really beneficial. You know, I think that training things in this way, this is how I train for bodybuilding.
So if it's a 4-week block, are you keeping the same movement for the entire block? So
it's a 6 microcycle block, but we still keep the framework from fifth set, which, if you remember, they're 9-day microcycles. So essentially you're doing, like, you're pressing twice in that time. You're hitting, you know, quads, hams, and glutes essentially twice in that time, you know, usually, you know, in some way or other. Back is going to get hit twice at least, for sure, in that time. So it's not like you're just doing, like, you're hitting a muscle group one time in 9 days. Yeah. There's a lot of overlap, and that's important, you know? So
if it's over that period of time, how do you anchor that first week to make sure that extras, because the repetitions are higher, right? They need to make it through the whole time.
Right.
Right.
So here's what I do. So there's an entry point in terms of, like, when I say pick a weight that you can or what have you, you know. So it's supposed to be a very difficult, like, for example, we'll talk about meso 1, right? And say you pick incline, say you pick, like, maybe, I don't know, an incline Smith machine. There's, I mean, like, just because I list 3 or 4 things on the template, there's obviously
infinite
things that you can put in there, right?
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, I have one question. Why? So if you can give me a decent answer why, I don't even care what the answer is. If you have a reason that you're thinking this is a train of logic of why I want to do it this way, I need more lockout, or I need more triceps, so I'm going to put a band on it, or what have you, or my stability is the limiting factor and I really want to develop my front deltoids and upper pecs. Okay, cool. So, like, say, for example, you pick a Smith machine incline press or something like that, for example. And the starting instructions might be that something that you have to get 8, like, so you know you can get 8 twice, right? So you should probably be pretty close to failing, but not failing on the first set. right? So if you give people that, it gives them in their head, they know, okay, this is supposed to be hard, right? But it sorts itself out after that, right? And I'll show you why. Because in micro 2, the recommendation changes in that now if you can, you do 2 AMRAPs, and I mean it's AMRAP, like nothing in the tank on both of those. If both of them are over 10 reps, which they probably will be because everybody underestimates what they're able to do, right? Then you have to add weight the subsequent microcycle. So then micro 3, there's more weight. AMRAP again, right? So you can see how this is a very potent hypertrophic stimulus.
Yeah.
This is what we want, right? That's because the biggest thing with, and I'll get into this a little bit too, as the science progresses, we're sort of learning more, maybe. Right now we think we're learning more, but who knows? We'll see in 10 years.
Yeah.
Because we thought we knew something 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
In terms of mechanisms, like, is it calcium ion exchange? Is it calcium ion fatigue? Right? It used to be, for sure, we were 100% sure it was muscle damage, right? That was stimulating the repair and growth. You remember? I mean, if you did any sort of schooling, that was what was taught, right? And what I found is that regardless of what I'm a practical guy, you know what I mean? Like when I was young, I did fabrication, which is like practical engineering, right? So like the stuff that I do, like you have to solve a problem. It needs to be able to do this. Like, okay, I got it. You know, so that sort of stuff, I could figure those things out. You know what I mean? Typically. And when it comes to what the actual mechanism of stimulus is, if any of those 3 things, those are the 3 big things that over the course of the last decade or so have been evolving in the literature. Training recommendations remain the same, right? So whether, right? So I don't care. That's the sort of stuff that like, it's interesting. And I'm like, oh, that's neat. So you're saying take it within 3 reps of failure or it won't cause a hypertrophic adaptation. Is that right? Right. Okay. So we already knew that. That's nothing new. Like Dorian Yates, Mike Mentzer, these guys were getting jacked doing that stuff decades ago, literally, you know? So it's not new. Just we like to really act like, oh, well, now I know this new, very specific information about, you know, it doesn't matter. The training recommendations really don't change. So as long as you're getting within 3 reps to failure, and I would say get within a rep of failure, because there's really, regardless of what people will claim happened in one particular isolated study or what have you, what I've seen in my experience working with more people than I can count and myself doing this and competing at a high level in bodybuilding and, you know, throughout the course of all that stuff, you get an idea of what's happening, what's causing. I would say within a rep to failure, maybe 2, anywhere from 5 reps, maybe even 4 for upper body stuff, to 30 will absolutely give you a potent hypertrophic adaptation. Period. Like it will. It's a good stimulus. And that's why, you know, I'm sure you remember the stuff with this method here. We had like a second pressing day that involved a very high rep protocol. Right. So it'd be like 25 to 30 reps, depending on what the protocol was. So it might be incline dumbbell press for 30 reps for 2 sets of 30, or wide grip bench press for 2 sets of 25. And it'd be heavy. Like we got out to where we're doing like 300 pounds for that, you know? So, I mean, that you can't tell me that wasn't eliciting hypertrophy. It certainly was. Definitely was. And now it's starting to come out like Brad Schoenfeld, you know who that is? So he just recently made a post in the last few months. I met him in person for the first time last year at the Athlete X thing that we did. And I had a little conversation with him there, and brilliant guy, you know, on point. I had heard of his stuff. I actually mentioned some of his stuff in one of the books. I forget which one might have been the first one, but I had a good conversation with him. And then I saw he made this post the other day. Essentially, it was a summary of what he took from the balance of the literature in terms of what's a good idea for training development, or like how to develop a program for hypertrophy. And he was saying that it's important to include basically all rep ranges from like 4 or 5 up. And I'm like, up to like as much as 30. So like I commented and I was like, well, I said, I definitely agree with you on that. And I mean, anybody that knows my stuff, like people were like laughing and sending it to me screenshots because that's exactly what I've been saying for a long time, for decades, you know? And yeah, I mean, if you look at just like it's anecdotal, but like in bodybuilding, guys that are the best bodybuilders, you have everything from Ronnie Coleman doing doubles with squats, right? In his training for or doubles with deadlifts in his training for the Olympia, he's pulling 805 for a double, you know, like what, a month out? Not saying that that's a good recommendation, but clearly he's, you know what I mean? Clearly it's effective. It's doing something. It's even if it's just feeding the other stuff, allowing you to handle heavier weights for the more specific hypertrophic stimulus, it's doing something. That all the way to like guys like, I can remember Craig Titus back in the day, everything he did, well, he wouldn't do less than 20 reps on anything. So my point is, these things do clearly elicit an adaptation.
Yeah.
It's not like he's different than other human beings, you know, in some meaningful way. He might have, like we were saying before, he might be a little further right on the bell curve, you know, but it's not like he's going to be doing the opposite of, you know, you can't say that you have to train in a 6 to 8 rep range if you got a guy that's doing really well in the 20s and a number of guys. I mean, how many people in bodybuilding advocated higher rep training? There's some talk about it being more expensive in terms of fatigue. That has not been my experience either. Okay, like I can tell you right off the bat, like just what we were just talking about with the very high rep protocol for pressing. Now, it may be that when you're loading the spine axially, the higher rep stuff, and it does stand to reason that would be more, that would definitely be more expensive in terms of fatigue, right? And maybe not worth it. And we experimented with that early on. I had a kid that was up to doing, when I was doing 405 for like sets of 25 to 30, he was doing like 365, and he was nowhere near as strong as me, but he was able to develop that and got really jacked doing it. But the recovery was insane. It's just that would, you know, he'd be out for like 4 days.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be able to do anything for like 4 days after that. So I'm like, there is an argument for it, but that doesn't mean, like, you got to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater with these things. Something I'm seeing is people will spot something like that. They'll see, you know, a phenomenon, and they'll say like, okay, well, see, that's bad, so we just never do that. Well, like, it's actually helpful with upper body stuff. With the pressing stuff, the higher rep protocol, the wide grip for sets of 25, real heavy, that has like people that have shoulder issues where they're not even hardly able to press. I've had people get to where like my shoulders don't hurt at all anymore, like where there's some sort of recovery element to it. And I'm not going to pretend I know what mechanism it is. Maybe there's more blood getting to it. I mean, I could come up with 10 ideas off the top of my head of how it's happening. It's very difficult to prove those things, but it's definitely happening. Like I had far less issues in recovering from my heavier pressing sessions while I was doing those in between. We were doing those as our second pressing day. And that's not light. Like I was working with 300 pounds for sets of 25 or so, maybe 315 for sets of 25, working up, you know, and still being able to handle heavy weights, you know, 4 days later within the same microcycle. So you can recover from the stuff, but that's just, you know, I think context is the most important thing when we look at how we're going to use these things.
Well, I think the greater rep range also helps, because where I see people getting locked in or kind of stuck with these hypertrophy phases is, you know, there's a dogma that the exercise needs to be the same throughout the whole phase, right? And on the other side of that, it's easier for a coach to program it that way as well.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So
there's a reason why
there's multiple reasons why things, you know, end up the way they do. Right. And if they're starting in 4 to 8 rep range, then 6 weeks, sometimes if you're going to progressively overload that, you know, may not be able to make it through that whole time period.
Yeah.
You know, because especially if it's a dumbbell movement, you're starting at 20-pound dumbbells at 5-pound increments.
Sure.
You know, you may not be able to get to where you're going to be. And so that brings in that where if you have an AMRAP every other week, I don't want to say it's like a deload, but it's like a reset, you know, to be able to still find a way to progress and keep that the same for the 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. Because the only other way I know about going at that is you can start with the reps really high, you know, 15 to 20.
Yeah.
And then by the time it's over, you're down in that 4 to 6 rep range.
So, okay. So I think I should give you even a higher level overview to explain, because this is kind of what you're talking about is definitely incorporated with what I'm doing here. So what I was saying before about the prescription in the beginning is going to be where they do something that they know they can get for 8 reps twice, right? They're probably going to get more than that. We could talk about that for an hour after this. People have no idea what failure is, or like they're just, you know, they flirted with it. It's when it starts to hurt. That's when I stop. That's not failure. But failure, like you and I know it, like anyone that's really kind of gotten into that, you know, the void, right? Like where you get into, you know what failure is, you know, where that you're going to die, you know what I mean? The bar's going to crush you, you know, that's failure, right? So, but for the average person, they don't really have an understanding of that. And I have to start, you know, by generalizing. But even for someone who does know, this is going to work. If you listen to what I'm saying here. So I tell them they have to be able to get this weight, whatever weight they work up to, and they work up with triples, so they're not like fatiguing themselves with the warm up, right? They get to a weight where, okay, this is going to be my weight, whatever it is, 315 something, what have you. They can get it for 2 sets of 8. They get the 2 sets of 8. Usually they're happy and surprised that they can get the 2 sets of 8. So, well, okay, I checked that box. But next week is when it comes, right? That's when, like I said, then you have to do that same weight again, but you got to do it for AMRAP. So it might be, like you said, where you find out, oh, it's actually, I could actually do 14 with the weight I thought I could. You didn't get that much stronger since last microcycle, right? It's that you actually could have done probably like 6 or 7 more than you did. And now you're finding out what that difference actually is. So there's a teaching moment there, you know what I mean? Where you're learning what you can actually do, right? And so that's important, right? And the fact that we're starting it where they don't get to add weight unless they get 10, right, on both. They might not even get 10 on both. They might, you know, if they do, that's good. If there's somebody like who actually knew, okay, they knew themselves what they're going to get, but you don't got to worry about them failing out. They're still going to be in an effective range. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to add weight to the bar to get an effective hypertrophic stimulus. You don't. You know what I mean? As long as I truly believe it's about proximity to failure. I mean, real failure, right? Like how close you get to real failure. The point where you're like muscular failure. Well, let's even just say concentric failure to where you can't complete a rep anymore. You got to get to close to that point, right? And if you're flirting and staying in the area 4 or 5 reps away, you're almost wasting your time. There are people that will argue that, yeah, you can get something out of that and then do. And I mean, I understand it. Like people like Israel Tell and so forth, and what he's saying is just a different way of looking at it. I'm not saying that is not valid. It's definitely valid. But for me, like, I think I want to get in there and get the most that I can out of a movement and then move to the next thing that has a slightly different stimulus. I don't want to waste my time doing stuff that's a little bit less than I could do, you know? So with that, they get to where, you know, what have you. Let's say someone makes it through to micro 5 and, you know, they're starting to round out to around 10 reps. They're actually not able to get 10 reps. Maybe they got 14, 15, add 5, they get 11, add 5, you know, they get like, you know, 10 and 9, they have to stay, you know, to where they're getting 10 and 10 towards the end. That's good. Now, the beauty comes into this in the subsequent mesocycle. So meso 2 of this foundations of hypertrophy stuff has them now, they can stick with the same movement, and they should. So this is a little bit of a divergence from what you were talking about, because we're not going to change the movement. I would recommend not. You can. If people, you know, my whole thing is it's still going to work. Yeah. Right. But here's the beauty of what we were just talking about and how this completely eliminates it. You already know what you were able to start with last meso, right? Well, now everything winds down and gets a little more intense. So meso 2, you start with a weight that you know you can get for 6. And then you move up when you can get 8s. So it's just a 2-rep difference. But the way that that plays out, and I've done this with a lot of people. I use this with basically all my clients now for part of the year. It's just night and day. After 2 mesos of that, and then they go back, you might think, and this is the biggest thing, is the psychological component of people not wanting to move away from doing the specific lifts, like not wanting to miss deadlift or no. So I'll give an example. I had a guy who I know he was concerned about not deadlifting, but he did switch to the RDLs. We did this whole thing. I mean, that's still a deadlift, right? It's still specific enough. And what are you talking about? You know,
well, I would wonder if over a period of several weeks, if it just ends up being a deadlift anyhow.
Well, that's the thing. I always, with these people, so anybody that's my clients that I work with one-on-one, like if I'm referring to somebody as my client, there's a lot of people that will say I'm their coach because they use the books and stuff. And I'm all for that. Like, yeah, I'm your coach. If I can talk to you ever, I'll give you the advice. You know what I mean? But a client is somebody who that's one of my lifters. That's somebody that I'm working with and watching all their lifts. So that won't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I would highly recommend, this goes for anybody that is listening to this, I will highly recommend that you take advantage of the ability to video yourself doing the lifts. Watch what you're doing. Like, why would you not want to be able to see a side view angle of your bar path? Like, do you want to get better at this? If you do, like, take a few minutes. I know it's annoying, especially if you have to train in a public gym. People don't want to be recorded that aren't doing it, you know. But I think there's a difference between, you know, wearing booty shorts and trying to get, you know, views and actually trying to document your training, especially when you're getting feedback from a coach. But even if you're not, if you know what to look for, watch what you're doing. I can remember Captain Kirk, like, you know, when I was coming up, talking about he would carry one of those big camcorders over his shoulder into the gym and set up the tripod and video his lifts. Where you had to put like a tape in there, you know, like there's no excuse. Everybody's got a high def, you know, camera in their pocket at all times now. Right. So for that, as far as that goes, that eliminates the problem. Now, if you're going to lie to yourself, if you're going to look at a video of yourself doing RDLs and like you said, it becomes a deadlift and you're going to continue to add weight to the bar, then you're your own worst enemy. I can't help you. Yeah. You know what I mean? But that's the main value of having accountability with an external source like a coach, right? Is that they're not going to game your head up and tell you, well, at least you hope they're not. If they're any good at coaching, they're going to be willing to tell you the hard truth. Like, that's like shit, dude. Sorry. That's not going to work. You need to take some weight off the bar, much less, you know, add weight, you know, you need to stay where you're at or fix that or what have you. So tech stuff, like I don't negotiate with technique. I don't think, like I'm very hard and fast on that. Like that's not ever going to change. I don't think that sloppy lifting is ever going to translate into better lifting on the platform, like heavier lifts. It doesn't go that way, you know? And even the people that do get away with sloppy lifting and training and somehow manage to pull it together on the platform, they would do better if they did the right thing. Yeah. And made technique a priority. You know what I mean? There's always going to be some freak outlier that goes against, you know, does good in spite of what they're doing, not because of it. And people see that and they're like, oh, well, this guy does that, I can do it. Like,
well, I see the same thing with the hypertrophy training as well, though, because even if the reps are higher, and it starts to get harder, they find ways to make it easier. You know, so it becomes sloppier and sloppier.
What's the goal? That's what you guys. Is the goal to lift more weight, or is the goal to lift more reps, or is the goal to get more jacked? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, are you trying to cheat and get more reps with doing like a dumbbell curl? Like, I don't understand. What is the point of that? There are arguments where people say things like, oh, using English, you're going a little beyond. It's like, dude, you're not even anywhere near failure. You're just not training the muscle. You know what I mean? Like most of the time when I see people using a bunch of like English, you know, in their technique, what's actually happening is they're not training the muscle as much as they could be. They could use less weight and actually hammer the muscle that's the target muscle that they're supposed to be training, you know? Like you don't even need to do things like for biceps, for example, you don't even need to do things like preacher curls or, you know, anything like that, concentration curls, things like that. You can just do regular movements correctly. You can do barbell curls and actually destroy your biceps if you do them correctly and control them and control the eccentric phase of movement. You know what I mean? Like you're going to destroy it doing that, like with no momentum. So it's not like you're getting more out of it by just doing the swinging. And I think a lot of that stuff is just specters of Arnie, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because everybody saw how he looked. And
well, I've heard several people use the terms, hypertrophy training for strength and hypertrophy training for for muscle.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they're different. They're not even, never the two shall meet.
Yes, exactly. And when I peel that back and try to get it better defined, where the difference is the intent on the concentric, to where if somebody's speaking about hypertrophy training like a bodybuilder, they may be starting the concentric, from, a full stretch pause, with just a muscle contraction and then accelerating, beyond that point where the ones that are speaking about hypertrophy training for strength are just explode right from the jump as hard as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And there will be a difference in how much weight somebody can use.
Oh, for sure.
Between those two.
Definitely.
So during these blocks that you're speaking about, where do you kind of fall there?
So I'm not even going to pretend there's not a difference between those two things. There definitely is a marked difference between them. I think, when we're training the movement, the difference would be training the movement versus training the muscle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So even in like the earlier mesocycles, when we're doing movement specific stuff, where I'm using the term like movement specific hypertrophy with bench, we're still training the movement. Right. So if you want the adaptations that you get to be in line with what the needs are going to be when you're taking that movement to a max, you're still going to want to use speed on the descent in those cases, right? Because you're training the movement, right? So to some degree, a ballistic approach is necessary, right? Like Fred Hatfield was big on that term. And I can remember prior to talking with him, I thought that was such a bad idea. And I'm young at the time. He was like a mentor to me as a young kid. He used to send me a program and some Bible verses, talk to him on email. He was a great dude. God rest his soul, taught me a lot. And reading his books, was awesome for me too. But that was one of the things what he emphasized in the training was doing ballistic training. And it definitely, there is something to learning how to control a fast eccentric into a concentric, right? Regardless of the fact that we have a pause in bench press and powerlifting, which is the first thing people think of, like, oh, well, you're going to have to pause anyway. That does not mean you should go down slow. Yeah. Like, oh, well, Stan goes down slow. Like, Stan is a freak of nature. And he would lift more if he went down fast. That's my opinion. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, look at 99% of people that bench heavy weights and how fast that bar moves. You know what I mean? It moves fast on the descent. And that's because it's a mechanical system. There's laws of physics that are at play here. They're immutable. You know what I mean? It's not like they're going to change. It is what it is. That's a necessary part of it's a necessary component of competition. So you need to tailor training to address that. But there's definitely something to be said for focusing specifically on hypertrophy, which is what we're talking about. Yeah. These earlier things. So there's a transition between training the muscles, the muscle groups, and training the lifts. And that's addressed even in the way that I label, the way that we name the various sessions in the templates. Like, so it'll be like chest and triceps, shoulders and triceps, like pecs and triceps, shoulders and triceps, like when it's not bench day. You know what I'm saying? And like the posterior chain stuff would be like glutes and hamstrings on this day, And it's not deadlift day. I mean, you may be doing deadlifts, but that's not the goal of the day. And so that's that kind of, just looking at that, just something as simple as that tells you my state of mind. Yeah. My, the frame that I'm looking at this in. Like, so I'm either training the muscle or I'm training the movement. If I'm training the movement, then we're going to train in a specific manner that's going to be similar to the way that we would do on the platform. Fast descents. I actually coach. I'll be like, we got to speed the descents up. That's one of the things. Like, so, my 4-4 checklist that I do, the 4-4 coaching method. Like, that's one of the things I do with my clients, right? One of the things is speed. When I'm talking about speed, I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about how fast you're pressing, because hopefully you're pressing as fast as you can. So that's not something that's really within your control.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But descent speed is, and it's usually fear. Oh, I'm not sure I'll be able to. So that's something you have to flirt with. You have to learn. It's kind of like failure. Like we were talking about, how do you know when you're failing? You have to learn. You got to know what failure feels like. You got to actually fail. You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to fail. Like I don't tell people to fail in training, and I want you to avoid it if possible, but you got to know what it is. So if you're not, if it's somebody that I sense has not ever really failed, that should be that's the first order of business.
Well, it needs to be anchored. I mean, if it's RIR, RPE, or whatever it's going to be, or whatever the coach uses, there has to be some way to anchor what you consider failure to whom you're speaking with.
That's actually borne out in the literature too. Like you can see that people, when they say how many reps they think they have left and what they actually have, is not right.
Yeah.
It's not even close. Never is. You know? I think a lot of that's training age, and
it will definitely change with experience, but why? Because they've hit failure, multiple times. So they kind of know what that feels like coming into all that.
You've probably brought an emotional palette into the gym to train with you once or twice over the course of time.
Yes.
That facilitated finding out what failure was.
Yeah. The only caveat that I find, even with all that, is you can train in a neutral training state or a really heightened training state, and that's going to make a big difference on what those numbers actually are. Totally. Right. And the systemic fatigue that's going to result just from being in that state.
Right. Well, you're doing it day in and day out too. Yeah. You accumulate fatigue, for sure. Like we know that. The idea that fatigue is just gone after a couple of days is nonsense. Yes. I mean, if that's true, then how come I'm able to have people put 5% on a lift in 30 days? When they're peaking to the third attempt in the meet, which is consistent. I mean, they always are able to hit this. So they're not getting that much stronger than they were in their peaking cycle when they were trying to do 100%. It's not that. It's that we were able to bring down that fatigue by changing their training load, right, and shifting more towards specificity. We're able to bring that fatigue down and thereby disinhibit their ability to express that fitness level, which is strength in this case. But it can be anything. Like I thoroughly believe, and I've seen that your ability to express your level of fitness in any characteristic, like even speed, it all goes down when you're carrying essential fatigue. You're carrying a ton of fatigue. So at the end of a training cycle, you're going to perform usually worse, unless you're outrunning the work you're doing. You're going to perform worse before you peak. Yes. And then after that, after we get rid of that fatigue, you're good, So yeah, there is that component of going like, ape shit, but that's usually not the limiting factor. Mm-hmm. To be real, especially with hypertrophy training, it's not usually.
What's a limiting factor?
So like, adaptation from week to week, the ability to, because if we're talking about hypertrophic stimulus, there's a limit to how much you can adapt in a given period of time, right? Just like with any other adaptation. These things are finite, and our capacity to adapt is finite. It's limited, It might be more, it might be less, Some people are on the far right side of the bell curve, like we were talking about before, that are just, anything you throw at them, they're going to be able to just knock it out of the park. Mm-hmm. Other people, you're going to have to really monitor and see, like, it might be that they're not able to see. That's kind of why there's a little bit of a buffer there on the hypertrophy templates, right? Is that they have reps, they could actually lose reps, and they're still going to be in a good range to stimulate hypertrophy. Some people will tell you that while you're carrying fatigue, you're not going to be able to really stimulate much hypertrophy. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. I think probably for most of his career, Ronnie Coleman was carrying a ton of fatigue, right? He was better constantly.
Mm-hmm.
He's consistently better. So I don't, and there's lots of other people that are examples of just going way beyond what's necessary, and they're still able to effectively stimulate hypertrophy. Now, optimal, there's an argument for optimal, but I think that we take care of that with incorporating those regular deloads.
Right? How would, if you have these hypertrophy phases that are put in there, is there a transition phase after those before getting into the main strength phase?
That would be, yeah. So typically what I would do is, and now even for people that I think are like, they do meet the criteria of what we were talking about before, like where you are the size you really need to be, right? There's still something to be said for that period of variation, right? Because overuse injuries are typically going to develop over time, right? And a lot of it is, that is the enemy of what I was talking about in terms of specificity. That's the biggest obstacle with specificity, is that if we're always doing exactly what we do in competition, overuse is almost certainly going to come into the picture at some point, right? With that said, you know, I do think that regular structured deloads can prevent, like, you know, 90% of that, even without doing this variation. But for people that are developed and they're as jacked as they need to be, they're, you know what I mean? You're at 275 and you weigh 300. Good. Then you're where you need to be. Still, they should probably do at least one mesocycle per year of this, understanding that the typical year has 2 macrocycles from my type of programming. Right? So that would mean just in one of them, for the first meso, you would include this type of template. And then you'd have 2 subsequent mesocycles before even peaking to get back into the specific stuff. So that guy who I was talking about before, who was like real reticent to give up actually deadlifting and wanted to stick with that, and then I was able to talk him into doing the RDLs. Like, he PR'd, rep PRs, his first meso back, like every micro. And this is not like a new guy. This is a dude who's been training for many years. So sometimes it's just a matter of stepping away and doing something that's similar enough to maintain the strength that you have. You're not going to lose most of those adaptations. There's like a period of readjustment going back to the specific training, to the powerlifting, what I call like our normal training. That's what I always say to my clients, you know. There's a little bit of a period of adaptation there, but like a learning curve, but it's less than you would think. I was worried. Honestly, that was what kept me for so many years from working this sort of thing in. I was worried, oh, what if they have a hard time? What if they have a hard time getting back to normal training? You know what I mean? Like, what if this goes, it's what you always think as a coach. You're like, oh, what if this goes sideways, you know? But I've had no issues with it. And these are people that have normal recoverability too, I'm talking about, not like freaks.
And do you have to build in either transitional blocks of hypertrophy during the strength phases, or in other words, how are you going to maintain all that? So
here's what you're not, first of all, hypertrophic adaptations are super easy to keep. They're not, it's not something that's like fragile. People are afraid they're going to like lose, you're not going to lose muscle. It's very hard to lose muscle. Like, look at my good friend Dave Palumbo. When he went from like, he helped me a lot when I was young in bodybuilding. He was one of my best friends during that whole period. Him and also Greg Kovacs, who was another monster, probably the biggest bodybuilder ever lived. You know, these guys were like my mentors. And anyway, when he decided that he was done competing and was going to like trim back down to a normal size, which now, if you've seen him now, he's normal size. He's like, you would say he's small now. He's still jacked. He's still like very lean and muscular, but this dude was 315 pounds at one point, and he's probably 5'8", maybe 5'7", something like that. Maybe 5'7", for real. Like, but just sideways. And it took him forever to lose that muscle, you know, like, and like trying, like knowing that he, you know, it took years. So it's not like muscle's just going to fall off of you. Here is the foundations, mesocycle 1, which is the foundations of hypertrophy. This is actually a new product that we're going to have. I believe we're going to sell it on the site here. So this is an overview and the breakdown of instructions, everything you need to know for that. But now we're going to work on picking your first movement. So for the chest triceps day, which will take the place of your normal first bench day. And all this stuff works on the same framework as the normal fifth set microcycles, so and meso and macrocycles. So they're 9-day micros. They fit into the normal mesos. The mesos fit into a normal macro. So you can just run meso 3 from the sequence system after running both of these, and you'll be able to hit without a hitch. Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. So you were saying you had issues with incline.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link.
Disappear in between cycles. It doesn't work that way. That's not to say that there's, that there's not going to be decay. There is, but it's a matter of, so if you look at, like, there's studies where they've looked at military people that were on bed rest, right? And like, you can in 10 days lose a ton of like muscle and various other capacities if you don't move at all.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You're probably not on bed rest, right?
Yeah. And you're still training.
Yeah. So you don't want to use that to generalize for regular people. You know what I mean? Like, you don't like, yeah, but that's not the normal rate of decay. Like, what it takes to maintain an adaptation is like a small fraction of what it takes to actually develop, that adaptation. So I don't really think it's as much of a concern that they're doing specific hypertrophy stuff. However, so I just wanted to say that because just generally speaking on this topic, like, I think people worry about losing muscle when it's not really something to worry about, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah.
But within the fifth set model, within this method, we're always doing some hypertrophy type stuff to some degree or other, right? So you're always doing MSMs for like sets of 5 that are really challenging sets of 5. And like, if you think that doing sets of 5 that are really challenging is not enough to maintain an adaptation, like, I got news for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you could do almost nothing and maintain adaptations. Like, you could probably go in and do one full body workout where you're hitting 70% for like a couple sets of 5 and maintain, indefinitely. And there's some study that I cited in, I think maybe the second book, or it might have been, it's definitely included in the coaching manual either way, at how long it takes to have decay at various levels of training, like where they looked at, and these were even older guys, right? So it was like one of the populations they looked at was, I think it was guys over 50, right? It takes a long time, and they're doing like, in some cases, I want to say it was like a third of the normal volume, right? So like, and it was like, and some of them, the cases, the younger people where I think they did a third of the volume, and they got stronger over the course of 9 months. Like, it was like it was minor, but they actually were able to develop doing much less than what it took for them to reach the level of adaptations that they were at that point. So, and I mean, that's what I've seen in my experience. Like, that's not surprising to me,
Yeah.
like with switching from different types of training, like, and that's the whole thinking behind periodizing, is that you're not necessarily going to lose one capacity while you focus on another, But in fifth set, we are always doing some hypertrophy. Like, there's always some. So even in Meso 3, say for people that were just doing like Meso 1 hypertrophy for the foundations stuff, Meso 2 hypertrophy for the foundation stuff, and then Meso 3 from either the sequence system, the MSM sequence system, or Meso 3 from Silverback. There's a bunch of different models of the sequence system, like sets of 3 mesocycles, right, that I've made over the years that I like sell templates for, but it's fifth set. These are the fifth set within the fifth set method. It's just me, like, I read the book for you and did this.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, like, that's what people want. Like, people don't want the book for $40 or $50 and then they can write their own stuff forever. They want you to like
Here's
here's the template with the rules on it. You know, they want it simple. You know, which I get that. You know, it is
what are some of the things that have evolved from the original fifth set? I mean, the hypertrophy, we covered that, but going back before that, what were some of the earlier things that evolved?
Okay, so something we were talking about right in the beginning here. When I say the original fifth set, I'm talking about the original book, the one with the fire on the cover. That was really, you know, we talked about what that's for. There's some pretty big differences from that to this. Like with that, basically there was no real rotation. Like you could pick a different exercise, but it was always, you were kind of always sticking with the same protocols essentially. You know what I mean? And the biggest difference is that rotating, having a somewhat of a periodized approach. Now with the sequence system and the stuff that was, you know, before this hypertrophy stuff, so the stuff we've been doing for the last 8 years or so, there was some, like I said, a periodized component, but the thing was the main lift was not changing. And the way we changed the main lift for the most part, although it did rotate to some degree or other, it wasn't changing in any meaningful way. It was the secondary stuff that was rotating. So like the assistance work, the MSMs, that stuff would change. And that's why it was called the MSM sequence system, right? So that was one evolution. That was one change, was the MSM sequence system, like, which is like, I kind of modeled that after Verkhoshansky's sequence system. The whole mesocycle and being able to modulate, like, you know, intentionally accumulate and then drop fatigue is stuff that I took from him, you know, and I kind of got in depth with where that came from, some of the discoveries he made, et cetera, in the book. You know, I talked about that. And so I'm a firm believer in specificity, like I've already said a million times. And I wanted to find a way to keep that stuff front and center, but still, you know, change the focus, because in my own experience working with people to that point, I would always change all their assistance stuff and all their MSMs as they got closer to meets and do exactly what we're doing here. This is kind of like a look. Of course, I systemized it a little more so the average person could read the rules and follow it. But it's basically what I've always done with clients, you know? So that systemization, that's a change from the first method to that. And now this is something that is more of a bigger departure than I've done in the past. But after experimenting with it, I'm so glad that I did it. And it easily translates. I kept all the fifth set framework, and it easily translates into something that's plug and play. You could just literally pull a mesocycle out and pop this in, and that whole macrocycle can remain the same. Or you can take the first two out, pop these in, and then the third is already, it's a beautiful bridge back to peaking. So even if they're not going to do a meet, they could just run it like that, and it's a good way to manage fatigue. You know, so we were talking about how fatigue is going to be an issue, but it's not usually the limiting factor with hypertrophy, but it's still an issue, right? And overuse is still an issue, right? So having that taper at the end, I always say every 6 months or so, there should be a taper involved, whether you're doing a competition or not, just to change the stimulus so it repotentiates for new hypertrophic adaptations. Yeah. Right. Doing like a strength block.
What were some of the things that you saw people basically just screwing up?
Like, do you mean more in the beginning or just? Oh yeah. Okay. So we think back or go into the Wayback Machine here. The earliest things that people would do is, I would say, AMRAPs that went just to absolute trash. Right. That was the biggest thing that plagued me in terms of work. Like, it's what I would see with people saying they're doing fifth set. And that's part of the reason I've been so vocal about, you know, that is not what I mean by AMRAP. I don't mean to do stuff you can't do. And just, you know, where it looks like your disc is going to fly across the room into the wall, like while you're squatting, like you're buckling forward and fighting. You're doing good mornings for the last 4 reps. Like, not only is that not only is that dangerous, I got news for you, it's not helping your squat at all. It's hurting your squat. So allowing technique breakdown and continuing sets, that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen people messing up on. And I've harped on about it a good bit over the years, but it's still, it bears repeating. You know, it's worth repeating that if you do, like, for example, you're doing a set of 5 reps and like the first 2 are good and the second one's a little bit shitty, and then the third and fourth one are garbage, like 3 out of 5, right, of your reps are training you to suck at doing that lift.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so you're actually teaching yourself to suck at that lift. It's not that you're being more intense or that you're being tougher. It's that you're teaching yourself to suck at that lift. You know what I mean? And by holding it together, and that's where the percentage method is beautiful, because you can stay in a range where you can actually still get adaptations that you're looking for. Like, it's sufficient stimulus to have adaptations that'll carry over to max lifts. Right? Like, you can still do that and train in a range where you're able to do technique correction. You know what I mean? So like anything over, like I would say 70 to 85% is a great range. Most people can make corrections in that range, at least on the low end of it. And as you get better at it, reinforcing corrective cues and the stuff that I use in my cueing system, you can do that up to 85%. And now there's a handful of people that I've seen ever that can make corrections with heavier percentages in that, like maybe Duff and people like that, but that's outlier stuff, I think.
Yeah.
You know, that's my experience. Most people can't correct a lift at a high percentage. Like, they just can't, like, they don't understand their body. Like, they can't communicate the cues to do stuff when it's
at that point, it's going to have to be automatic.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah. And how do you get it automatic? The lower percentage stuff. Yeah. That's the way I've found that is the best way to incorporate that into training in a way that's going to make like meaningful differences in technique.
Well, the specificity of those lifts, when that comes into the conversation, there's a lot of assumptions that are being made. That the first biggest assumption that's being made is that all the repetitions are being done correctly. You know, and because you can see programs that are extremely highly specific, you know, and as you would say, you would look at a set of 5 and 3 or 4 reinforce bad technique, right? You know, out of the one. So is that really
60% of your training?
Well, I mean, it's weird, right? Because is that really specificity? And then
no,
you know,
no, I would say no.
Then it gets in my brain, because I like to overthink shit. Like, specificity to what? You know, and they'll say, well, you know, a comp lift. And I'm like, so you mean the one that you're going to walk out? And yeah. And so then only the first rep of that set of 4 actually mattered, right? Because if we want to speak real specificity,
that's super specific.
There's a walkout, there's a command, you know, there's a rack command, right? You know, so if you want to go to this, how some people would define that specificity, you know, competition lift specificity. In my brain, I'm like, no, you know, because go to a competition and watch the lift. And then that would be competition specificity at its highest degree.
I would say there's like layers to that.
Yeah, there's definitely layers.
You know what I mean? Like, and that's the idea of what I try to do, is that like you're absolutely right. You can't do competition specificity year round. Yeah. Right. But I think that when we get too far away from competition specificity, like
it can happen
where the movement is like, it's, you know, then it's something else altogether.
Well, it definitely can happen. It can happen under fatigue, is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, those heavier sets. Yeah. You know, they kind of just ingrain all into that.
Right. Well, I mean, also like you're sort of like what you were saying with like walking it out. Like, you can't walk it out on every rep, right? So that's something, right? And even like bench press pauses, like, I don't think it's a good idea. You're losing that ballistic component that actually helps to develop strength. That's what increases that rate of force development. That's what it improves the motor unit recruitment efficiency, is actually having that ballistic, that demand. Right?
Yeah, and that can be brought in during the last phase.
Yeah, the pausing. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, so then we go back to, we try to get more and more specific to where actually the peaking cycle, I have people do like a start, press, you know, the whole rack.
I was going to say, because some federations have a start command and people can screw that up if they're not practicing that, you know, and especially because it's not all federations either.
Right. So there's no consistency in powerlifting, man. It is what it is. Yeah. Sometimes you have everybody soft starting, and other times they're like, if you know.
Well, I've seen some people just hold because they're waiting.
They're waiting,
right?
Yeah.
And because they're so used to that. But this
Where's the
federation,
coach, man? The coach is supposed to be like supposed to say it, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I've done that before where I see people just holding where we're in a meet where there's no start command, and I'm like, press, go, start.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they use it's funny, RPS says bench instead of start. Other ones are different cues, you know, different federations have different rules. But I mean, look, if you're not, that's day one powerlifting stuff, man. If you're not familiar with the federation you're competing in, you need to stay for the rules meeting in the morning and listen to them go through that stuff, you know, which is, you know, obviously for us, that's like mind numbing.
Yeah.
Because I've been through like 400 rules meetings.
Yes.
But so I'll just ask a question.
Yeah.
I'll be like, is there a start command?
Yeah. Well, the best ones are the ones that just, they come out and say, hey, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's exactly.
No, we're good. Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
It's like, no, wait a minute. Like if there's a beginner in there, you know, the odds of the beginner wanting to raise their hand.
Right. That's true. Yeah, it's tough on them.
0, right?
Well, read the rule book too. It's always online.
Yeah,
that's the other thing, you know, ahead of time. Like a lot of the lessons that you learn in powerlifting early in your, for lack of a better term, lifting career are things you're never going to forget because it's usually a bit of embarrassment attached to it, you know, stuff like that. Like, oh, there's no start command. Oh, there's, you know, things like that, you know? Yeah. And sometimes it's, I mean, there's no wrong way to learn something, I guess.
When I was at Westside, I trained with Rob Fusner, which, you know, at some point in time was like number 1 308. You know, so when he started, he was always strong. Like his first meet, he asked, you know, so I give him credit because it's his first meet. What lift comes first? You know, and we're kind of like looking at him like, the fuck, you know. And then he goes out and wins the whole meet, wins best lifter and everything else.
What lift comes first?
Yeah. Because it was his first, he didn't know.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And we're not like thinking that anybody
you don't even think about that.
No, we're not even thinking about that.
Yeah.
But, you know, the more I thought about it over the years, the more crazy that gets because like he would have been cool if it was like deadlift first.
Yeah.
Didn't make any difference to him.
That's
you know,
great.
Just like what's first.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Those are the people that end up being unbelievable. You know? Yeah, that's crazy. I've seen it over the years, man. People do some amazing things. Mind-boggling in powerlifting. And when I think of the things that I've been present for myself, you know?
Yeah, what are some of those that come to mind first?
Oh, sheesh. Well, first thing that comes to mind as I'm saying that through my head, I was thinking of Andrei Milanichev at Rome when I was competing in Rome and coaching also some people there. It was when he was at the top of the game, you know, it was all of a sudden there's like this guy that can squat over 1,000 pounds raw, you know, and he was there and I met him backstage and he didn't really speak English well, but nice enough guy. And like, I remember I got a picture with him, you know, and he shook my hand and then he like looked at, like motioned at me like something was wrong. And then he like went over and just started violently vomiting in the trash can next to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, wow. So just like, I still have no idea what was going on.
You're so ugly, you made him sick.
Yeah, like I guess it didn't smell good or something. I don't know. But yeah, it was right after, like I still have the picture of like me and him standing there, and I remember like it was like 8 seconds later he threw his guts up. It was right after he lifted, you know. But yeah, some of that's amazing to see that. Whatever total, you know what? That's crazy. Someone else has pointed this out to me recently. You don't remember numbers. No. Like I remember it was amazing that he squatted over 1,000 pounds and everybody in the world was talking about it, you know, because like nobody really had done it, you know, raw. And now obviously that's like a thing of the past. But you don't remember the numbers. You just remember that it was some crazy thing. You know? Yeah. It was like some new thing, you know. Around that same time and probably that same meet, Dan Green it was that same Rome, that same year, Dan Green hit some crazy figure that now is a joke in that weight class. Like it's a dude that just did like 2,500 at 242 or something like that. Colton, what's his name? South African kid. You know what I'm talking about, right? I think his name is like Colton the Limit Breaker or something like that. Definitely, hands down, most impressive performance I've ever seen in the history of powerlifting. I'm sad I was not there to see it because it was insane. And that dude is, wow. Wow. There's another guy from New Jersey, Kyle, young guy, who's also, I think he's a pro bodybuilder actually, but young dude. He's in his early 20s. There's a handful of guys now that are just doing things that at that time period I'm talking about, like with Milanichev at Rome, and when was that? 2015, 14, something like that, like 10 years ago. Things that were just inconceivable at that time, that the human being was going to do those things. How many people? There's multiple people squatting 1,100 pounds now. I just saw Zahir do it. Actually, Zahir is another one who I've seen do insane stuff in person, and he's quite a character. He's somebody that I managed to actually stay friends with, although he's not in the country and, you know, is not the best at English. We do keep in touch and, you know, talk on.
Like the emoji thumbs up.
Yeah, well, we'll talk, but he just, you know, he spells things in a way that, like, the way they sound, like Broder, like Broder, stuff like that. Instead of brother.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
But I mean, hey, it's way better than my, whatever his language is. I couldn't speak anything in that.
So what do you think contributed to the increase in strength over the past 15 years?
Honestly, I would love to tell you that we figured some special thing out, right? But I think it comes back to it. It makes perfect sense with the same stuff that I was talking about before. The pool, we've had more people doing raw powerlifting, you know? Whereas, like, for example, like not that long ago, the 198 world record all time raw was like 1,800 pounds or something like that. 1,850, I think, when Ryan Sully had it. What's it now? Right? Like, what is it now? Think of it. It's insanity. You're talking about 500-pound differences in that time period. And the reason is, it's not that people figured out some special new technique or really like hammered down, like, what are the drugs that are going to make me this strong? Now I have the secret combination. It's that you're getting more of those far right people on the bell curve into the pool, because the total number of people doing raw powerlifting has exploded.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, worldwide, raw powerlifting was not really a thing 15 years ago. Like, it was, you know, like, I mean, I did it when I was young, but it was, people took off their gear. The people, for the most part, people that were powerlifters wore gear, and they might do a meet raw, you know, like it would say like without belt or singlet, like on the total.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sport in and of itself, and it is now. And, for a while there, it was, you know, almost the entirety of the population competing in powerlifting was raw. It was heading that direction. Now it's starting to sort of swing back a little here and there. You know, there's some divisions there's new interest in the band shirts and things like that. I haven't kept up on the numbers, but I remember we talked about the numbers, some of the stuff that was in one of the books. At the time, it was, you know, I think there was about 18,000 in the United States competitive powerlifters, right? So that's not a huge number, but consider that rotates almost completely every 3 years.
Well, right? At this point, it's probably tenfold that.
Right. And there's how many people that are like non-competes. They're never going to do a competition, right?
That's most.
That's most, right? But there's no way to track that figure, right? So what I would assume is, excuse me. What I would assume is that number has proportionally increased, just like the total number of people that are competing in raw powerlifting has increased, right?
Yes.
So probably at the same rate. And so that means that the chunk of the iceberg that we're not seeing is even much larger than it was before, right? So out of that group, people do the things that we do, train like a power lifter or whatever, try to put on muscle through whatever means possible, and you end up with more freaks that accidentally figure out, like, oh dude,
I'm good at this,
I could total 2,300 pounds at this. It's not even that hard, like, you know, which a handful of people have done that. You know, I could total 2,400 pounds at this weight. You know? And like, they get with a coach or someone that keeps them from railroading themselves, and you see these people just like meteoric rise, like where the technique looks good, and just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this dude is doing stuff that we didn't think anybody could do. We didn't think it was possible. We thought it was going to be 5 pounds here, 5 pounds there. What was actually happening was, like, when Dan Green broke Cole's record, right, that had stood for 20 years, there weren't that many people cracking at it, you know? But that was like, that gave people permission when he did that to break the record. And then boom, 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 boom. It got broken like 20 times in a course of 2 years, you know? And that's continued because people see like, oh, well, this is possible, you know?
Yeah.
And that draws people into being interested in that type of training. And then they realize like, oh, there's a venue where I could become popular based on this special skill set I have. So of course people are gonna, when they realize, oh, I could be good at this. And now with the internet.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about that iceberg, because that's a great analogy of what's really going on. There's different ways to see and define, to go back to the technical aspects, you know, of the lifts. And I guess the Athletic Live event was kind of a good example of that because, you know, you've done it a few times. So I get there and I'm trying to figure out the demographic. Like what am I going to, what am I going to coach? Right. Because at the time it was just like, you're going to have this section of the gym, just kind of do whatever you want. Right.
These groups.
And I'm like, are these like beginners or they were intermediates? You know, so we asked different people and like, oh, no, they're intermediate, you know, they're intermediate, you know, then I'm got a hold of you. I'm like, so where do they kind of like fall? They're these complete total beginners, dude. Right. And with the main lifts, because of what
we're talking about.
Because
we have a specific meaning for that.
Yeah. Now when you get out of the main lifts, I'm the fucking beginner, right? You know, and they're way more advanced.
You saw the stuff.
I'm just trying to figure out like how, like, what do I need to do trying to coach a squat here? Like, where's going to be the starting point of all this? And when you're dealing with that, and we talk about like a technical aspect, and it's a coach or even an athlete that's kind of getting into all this, you know, we're speaking under a different assumption than what they may actually be working at.
Right. Yeah.
Because they may not even be able to squat the bar correctly, just from a skill standpoint.
Right.
You know, it's, you know, like me trying to do a sport I've never done before in my life.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to know what the fuck I'm doing. But the athleticism's there to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But you gotta know
where they're at,
right? Yeah. And you work with, you know, a lot of people in the seminars. You deal with a lot of different people, so you got to diagnose pretty quickly, like where they kind of fall on that curve. Yeah. Because a counter argument that somebody would make to the technical standpoint is, well, they're not even strong enough to really start working their technique anyhow, which I don't agree with that, by the way. So I'll put that out there. But I see where it's coming from. Sure, you know, like obviously if they can't squat the bar with good form and you make them stronger, you know, they should squat the bar with better form, but you can still squat the bar. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not like they're not strong enough. They just don't have the
they just don't know how to be able to do that. So the way that programming is going to be a little bit different, you know, and how it's going to be in there. So when you're working with a population like that, even in a seminar setting, well, use the deadlift because that's what you taught. So where do you start them? Right, because you kind of had a feel of who you're working for, but let's assume you didn't have a feel.
Yeah. So you're touching on something that's hugely important. If you're actually going to work with a diverse population of people, right, you got to be able to gauge what does this person need to hear and like what are they going to understand, because good advice that somebody doesn't take is bad advice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you got to ask yourself, like, what is this? Because they're not going to understand, or they're going to misunderstand what you mean. They're going to think you are focusing on something else. So I like to start at ground zero, you know? Like, so even I've worked with top level, like the very highest level in competition for powerlifting and various sports. I assume they know nothing. And then like, you know, and I look at cues, like eye contact, I try to figure like, okay, so you know what I mean, right? So I'll give you an example. One of the people who I was instructing during my presentation on the deadlift, one of the people that happened to volunteer is actually the guy who won the whole thing. Right. And like, I had no idea if what he was going to, you know what I mean? I don't know who he was or if he had ever deadlifted in his life. You know what I mean? So I started off treating him like he was a baby to this, you know, respectfully. And I started to gauge, I'm like, okay, this dude, maybe I can use him for some other, let's try sumo. Like I can use him to coach and instruct on like, you know, slightly more advanced stuff that's going to be a little bit more difficult because it was perfect. I had no idea who he was when he first came up. Yeah. Like I didn't think he was the guy who was going to win. In fact, I was almost sure that other guy Levi would win, and he ended up being one of the only finishers. But this dude won, Carlos. And yeah, that's the sort of thing. Like, I'd love to be able to say, oh well, if this, then this. But that's the sort of thing that, like, you know, I've worked with 4,000 or 5,000 people in person at seminars. And at first I wasn't very good at it. Definitely not as much as I am now. My patience was, I'd be like, dude, come on. Like, or move along, next person.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of assuming that they're at a certain level.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, why are you here? Like, that sort of thing. But now I realize that those are the people that are going to get the most out of it. And like, the question is, why am I here? You know what I mean? Like, I'm here. I want to make a difference in their lifting. I want them to have something that's actionable when they leave. You know what I mean? Like, you've worked with people and seen a difference, and there's a feeling like no other that goes with that.
Well, there's some intangibles with that too, because if it's a big enough group and you have somebody in there at that skill level, and then people at a higher skill level, most of the time in today's world, the people at a higher skill level are either coaches or are training with other people that they're helping. Right. Or at some point, somebody's going to ask them, what do you think about my squat, bench, or deadlift? Just because they're bigger and stronger. And they may not know how to coach the person that's actually asking. Right. So
you're helping. Yeah.
They're able to see, you know, and to pay attention and then know how to be able to do that if it's their cousin. Yeah. You know, who just first started training.
This is sort of like, you know, throwing a stone in a pond, you know, and you know, the way that spreads out, like, it's not just where you hit the water, it's all the other things that are affected by that, you know, those circles that sort of expand. Like, when you teach somebody something, they teach people that, you know. How many people, I've had people come up to me on the street just from the videos that we do, be like, oh, you taught me how to bench press. You know, I'm like, oh, really? That's awesome, man. We were at I was at the Indiana State Fair with my wife and her family the other day, and this guy's like, is this you? You like pulled it out on the spine. I was like, yeah, it's me. You know, and it's great because it's like, it's not some kind of, like, I wouldn't want some kind of useless celebrity, like weird, like, there are people that like are sort of internet famous, and it's sort of like, well, what does that dude even do? Like, you just, you know, like, you make these stupid videos or whatever. This stuff, the educational stuff, is like, that's great. That's something that, like, makes a difference in people's lives. And like, I never met that dude. And there's so many examples of that. People come up to me at meets, or, oh, I run your method, or, oh, I read your book, or, oh, I see your videos, those tutorial videos that you guys have on your YouTube that I did here. I get so much people come up to me about that more than anything else. That is the best feeling, because it's something that I'm like, yeah, that's what I want. Like, that's what I want to do, is actually make a difference in a way that where, okay, this person doesn't even know me, but has a relationship with me because they learned something from me. And how many people are like that? Like, I never had an extended conversation in person with Fred Hatfield, but I'm still talking about him to this day. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because of the stuff that he taught me, and the little bit of effort that he put out there and like made to things like that changed my direction. You know, I think we can, it's very easy to lose sight of the impact that we have on other people, and that could be positive or negative, you know, like just being a dick to somebody that you, like, you're in a gym training somewhere, and some guy's like, oh, you got two options here. You know what I mean?
And if you're predominantly online, you're not seeing the positive, you know, as much if it was inverse. You know, I've used the example of Wendler several times in this case, where, you know, everything that he was doing for the longest period of time was all online. Right. And most of what grabs your attention is going to be the negative shit that's associated with all that. And there usually is more negative than there is positive. You know, it's just kind of how it plays out online. Then when he started working with the football players in person, it was a completely inverse.
Oh, that's right. Because he's coaching.
Because after every practice, or, you know, every time he's training somebody, is, you know, thank you, you know, whatever it is, you know, there's a lot of accolades of, you know, fist bumps and all this other kind of shit, which flips it on his head, because there's very little, you're an asshole, or this is bullshit or any of this other kind of stuff. It's completely gets inverse.
Right.
And if somebody is online or aspires to be like an online coach or whatever it's going to be, you need to understand that.
Definitely.
You know, that
it's going to be what you see is not, you're making an impact beyond what you see online.
Well, it's not the real world.
It's not real. And you're right, because like, I mean, over the years, obviously plenty of people have said negative stuff about me online or what have you. And like, I don't even really respond to it. I don't want to feed into it. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, whatever. But that's never happened in person. It's crazy.
No, but
I've been in these events my entire life where I'm in our, this is our field. This is, you know, and I'm at the Arnold. I'm at every major power. Never once in my entire career have I had somebody come up to me and talk shit, say negative stuff about what I do in terms of work. But how often do you see that online? It's almost
all the time.
Yeah.
You know, but your example of the fair, you see the inverse.
Oh, totally. No, it's there. And it's important for people to understand that are putting out positive things.
Yes.
And like, there's a handful of people, like good example, Jeff Cavalier, the Athlete X guy. That's how I met him. He made a video of like he thought was the best of YouTube or something and included me on it. And like, I had no idea. Because, you know, I don't really watch YouTube that much. You know what I mean? And so like someone goes, hey, did you see that Jeff Cavalier gave you a shout out? And I was like, no, I mean, look. So I go and look. I like searched for it and found it. And yeah, he says all this nice stuff. He's like, and the whole video, I realized, I'm like, there are people that are just doing positive. The video is like the worst of the internet, but he's like, I'm not going to say the worst. That's like pointless. It was just to get people to click. He's like, so I will show you the stuff I actually watch. Cause why would I don't even know what I don't like. I don't watch it. You know what I mean? And he said some nice stuff about me with that. And like another good example. So that's one thing that's awesome. So there are positives. There are people see when you're trying to do positive stuff, when you're trying to help people, when you're trying to educate and do positive things, right? If you look at the comments on your YouTube videos, like I typically never look at comments because it's almost always negative stuff. But on those videos, it's nothing. It's like hundreds of people just going, this is great. Thank you so much for this. Wow, that helped a lot. Like it's that, wow. I'm like, man, I couldn't do that regularly because it would mess my dopamine all up. You know?
Yeah.
But it's funny. There are, you see it's not real. It's a funhouse mirror, what you see on the internet, both in terms of the responses and what most of the people are doing, like in terms of the way they present themselves. You know, most of the other people that you see, they're trying to project some image that's not who they are, you know? And when you meet them, you realize you're like, this ain't that dude. He's not like that. Like you're fake. You know, you're not real. And like, I'm just as guilty as anybody else of it. And over time it happens. You get popular because of something you did or something gets a response that you want. And it's like that sort of cultivates what becomes your personality. And like you start to imitate that behavior. And, you know, I've written about this a little bit. And it's true. Like have you ever heard it said that like Elvis was an Elvis impersonator before he died? It's true. You know, he was trying to be a version of himself that he wasn't anymore. You know what I mean? He was trying to be the one that like the whole world went crazy for. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, like I'm not Elvis and you know, you're not Elvis, but like to some degree or other, we all end up doing that. You end up doing like I've done my best impersonation of Swede at different times, you know, or it's like these were old versions of me. You get stuck and that can happen like to the point where people get crystallized into some weird online persona and you don't even really, you meet them in person. You're like, you're not even like a real person. Like they can't interact with you. You realize like you can't like,
I've seen that.
Yeah. You know, it's like they're frozen. Like they can't.
Well, you're like looking, especially if you knew them before.
Oh, that's worse.
You're like looking for that. Like, where's the dude I used to know?
Like,
I know he's there.
It's you, but it's not you.
You know, where'd it go? And that's not to say that change is bad, right? Right. It's more to say what you're saying here is, you know, they're trying to live up to a part of their personality, which is true,
right?
Which just resonated more.
Sure, yeah.
That they lean into that harder and harder and harder, but don't realize that's just a piece of their personality.
They're letting an algorithm, like, you know,
well, they're
essentially cultivate who they are. It happens. It's
kind of self-censoring themselves.
That now too,
Yeah,
more so now than before. But yeah, definitely, people don't say things it used to be. People would say crazy stuff publicly attached to their name on the internet. Now, people are they seem to be going the other direction with it, to where they're trying to be like they're real careful to only say just exactly what, you know, they think is going to get the right response that they're looking for. It's very targeted. It's very intentional.
Yeah, I want to jump into longevity.
Okay.
Here.
Actually, so, I got to piss. Like,
let's take a pee real quick. Yep. So to the topic of longevity, first off, define that for me, because that's one of those words.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of trendy words that pop up. And
I'm not really big on the branding of longevity. I wouldn't say, like, I think that when you think of longevity, you think of like Dave Asprey and like people that drink their own pee and stuff like that. Like, no, like I don't mean anything like that. Like, so, I'm concerned, you know, probably the same way you're concerned. I want to stay alive. I got kids, you know, I got another baby coming, you know what I mean? And living the kind of lifestyle that we've lived in terms of what priorities were for at least decades on end. You know, it's very difficult for people to stay in good shape, cardiovascular speaking, especially when it comes to like blood work, things like that. And so I made that the main focus of, you know, supplementation, and it's something that my main focus of my research that I've done myself, and, you know, trying to incorporate, of course, anything that I do for myself, I try to also like have a secondary effect to my clients, because they're like family, you know, and also my family, you know, my mom and dad are both still alive. I'd like to try and help and keep it that way as best I can, you know. So I would say I started to really be concerned about blood work around 2015 is when I first started looking at my blood work. I had a little bit of a health scare because I had like a palpitation that I was getting, like where I was like, what is going on? I felt like my heart was skipping a beat. And so long story short, I ran into this. I told my doctor what was happening. So I met with him and he's like, oh, it's cool. Well, we can do an echocardiogram, you know, right here in the office. So I'm like, oh, cool, easy. It's like right on my street, you know. So they had someone come in the morning, one morning, and they gave me an echocardiogram. And then I'm at a powerlifting meet like a week or so later, and I got a call from his office, and they're like, yeah, do you have a minute to talk? We need to talk. I'm like, okay. And they're like, it was the nurse, and she's like, oh, you're in heart failure. And I was like, heart failure? What do you mean? And she's like, yeah, your ejection fraction was low on the test that we did. So I'm like, are you sure about that? Like, I'm in pretty good shape, you know. I'm doing like at this point I was doing hard cardiovascular training 3 times a week, including like sprints for one of those days where I was really hammering cardio. Plus I was really heavy in training, like doing, you know, AMRAPs of over 600-pound deadlifts, like, you know, stuff that I was like, man, I can't understand how I could be in heart failure and have that be the case. Which, long story short, I'm not going to be too dramatic about it. I wasn't actually in heart failure. Here is the Foundations Mesocycle 1, which is the Foundations of Hypertrophy. This is actually a new product that we're going to have. I believe we're going to sell it on the site here. So this is an overview and the breakdown of instructions, everything you need to know for that. But now we're going to work on picking your first movement. So for the chest triceps day, which will take the place of your normal first bench day. And all this stuff works on the same framework as the normal 5th set microcycles, so and meso and macrocycles. So they're 9-day micros. They fit into the normal mesos. The mesos fit into a normal macro. So you can just run meso 3 from the sequence system after running both of these, and you'll be able to hit it without a hitch. Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. So you were saying you had issues with incline.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link.
All right, guys, I'm here at elitefts. I'm at the compound. Nobody is watching right now, so bear with me. I found some bands that I need really, really bad. I'm gonna throw them in my bag and take them home with me, so don't tell anybody. Bands are absolutely great. If you're looking for the safest way to train to become fast, to become explosive, become strong, safety, 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 safety. Watch some videos about using bands. Why should you buy the elitefts bands? I swear. Promise you guys, these bands will last longer than any other bands you will buy anywhere. They're a little more expensive. They're gonna last a heck of a lot longer. elitefts.com. Get your bands just like I am. See ya.
All right, guys, you like the podcast, but maybe you're a little tired of all the interruptions. We set up a YouTube membership. You'll get extra content, and it's all ad-free. Join today.
It was the test that they use when the way that they do that diagnostic when they wheel the machine into the office is apparently not the best for cardiology purposes. Like, they're great for, like, you know, pregnancy and so forth, but apparently it's not the best. And I went through, it was 2 weeks of basically almost a month of hell, because I thought I was dying, you know. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna die. I'm like, how long do I got? You know,
Yeah.
I'm like thinking, oh man, like, well, I'm gonna keep training. So I was like, I don't know, if they tell me I can't train, I'm still training, doing it anyway. Like, if that kills me, that'll be it, you know. And I was young at this time. I was like, man, 34 or something like that, you know, young. This was years and years, maybe 10 or more years ago. And I contacted someone that I knew through Dave, a cardiologist in New York, who's like the cardiologist for the Giants. And, you know, he's like a really rock star dude, you know, and he's like, well, get them to send me a copy of the disc. We got to get the test redone. So I go to an actual cardiology clinic. They redo the test. Long story short, my ejection fraction was 65% first thing in the morning when my heart rate was like in the 50s. And they're like, you're fine. There's nothing wrong. So they had to redo the whole thing, and they're like, you're actually fine. I can't believe that they did a report based on the images, because they were so bad. So, but that gave me, like, I was like, I'm like, well, what about the heart palpitation thing? He's like, oh yeah, you just had one of them. It's a PVC. He's like, they're harmless. It's fine. It's not. You'd had that while we were doing the test. It's not even nothing to worry about. He's like, if it becomes too bothersome, we could give you something, but I'd rather not. You don't need anything. You have no sign of myopathy. So I'm like, okay. So I left, and from basically that was like a dividing line. Like, everyone's got like those before and after moments in their life. You know, where I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to consider this. I'm gonna have to think about, you know, what can I do to mitigate risks, and what can I do to make sure that I stay in. So I committed to getting regular blood work done. I started to do research into what these things were. You know, what is HDL? What is LDL? You know, why do certain things, you know, throw that stuff out of whack, you know? And I basically had to, you know, I'm an autodidact. Like, everything I've ever learned, I've learned myself. You know what I mean? I was in correctional schools. You know, I didn't learn much in school. I think I was good at math, and so I was in like advanced math classes, but everything else, I just didn't want to do it. I wasn't interested in it. And I just wanted to learn the things I was interested in. So I've always been able to teach myself or learn from books. I've never had any issue with that. So I started to research. I started to look into what does what could potentially help counteract and so forth. And, I put together a supplement protocol that I started using. And I think that's now not exclusively that, but I think that's a big part of the reason that I was able to stay healthy and not have any issues, because of all the people. I feel like I should definitely be one of the people that has issues and I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I post my, I post my blood work and stuff, and which is something that there's a lot of people that give advice on the internet and don't. And I already know what your blood work looks like, dude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I already know what it looks like. I don't even need to see it. But the fact that you're not posting it is, while you're giving advice, is evidence enough, So I would say I got to the point that I'm pretty fluent in these tests and what they mean, and also the mechanisms by which we get ourselves into a jam. Lifters, androgens being the biggest thing, and the effect that they have on on our bodies, not just on our muscles, but like for example, having high levels of androgens in your blood, even high normal levels, increases the amount of EPO that gets released from your kidneys, right? So that's one thing that I'm sure you're familiar with, the red blood cell issues that are pretty common with what we do, right? So there's that EPO, you get more EPO released from the kidneys. This is just from having androgens without any other situation going on. Also, having the high androgens in the blood sensitizes the bone marrow to EPO. So not only do you have higher levels of EPO, but you have more sensitive bone marrow to the EPO. So those two things together, there's like a two-pronged effect where red blood cells can go through the roof, even with high normal levels. Right? That's not particularly dangerous unless you get the platelets high and you have clotting and so forth. But yeah, that's a big issue, right? And so I was struggling with that for a long time, and I assumed until about 2015, I assumed that it was just that, because I could map out mechanisms that would explain it. But it was actually right around the time that I started writing for you guys, like 2015. I got an apnea test done, right? And which was a result of Eric. I'm sorry, what's Eric's last name? The guy that was on the team.
Talmot?
Yeah. Eric. Was it? No, Eric. He had his gym. He was on Elite. Not Eric Talmot. Eric. Well, anyway, he was the guy that was really big, pushing on, saying how much of a difference CPAPs made for him in our little Elite.
Yeah,
group.
So it had to be a bigger dude.
Yeah.
He'll come to me in a minute.
That's okay. And long story short, I got an apnea test done. I had a sleep study done, and I was having them left and right, of course. So when you have apneas, that causes a hypoxic state, right? So you're in oxygen debt. That also causes, and it turned out that when I got a CPAP and corrected that, I had no more issues with the red blood cell stuff. So that wasn't even a problem anymore. So any of the stuff that I was dealing with as a result of that, sometimes there is a mechanism that explains it, but it's actually something else, And if you look at lifters, I think most lifters need a CPAP. That's big guys. Anybody that's developed, I had a 114 female that needed a CPAP that was crazy because her neck was jacked.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. I talked to my doctor about it, and he said anybody over 18 inches, almost definitely, if your neck's over 18 inches, and at the time mine was 21 and a half or 22, something like that. It's huge, So of course, and the reason for that is as you develop muscles around the circumference of your throat, your neck, essentially, that stuff gets thicker and heavier. And as we fall into the deepest state of sleep, they finally begin to relax and they close the airway, right? So you get an obstruction. That's the stuff that's going to kill us, man. That's the stuff that ends up having us throw clots and kill. That's the immediate stuff, That's one of the big things. But also the other thing is arteriosclerosis, and androgens they promote an orthogenic environment. They cause all sorts of disruptions in the balance of our lipids in our blood. And there's a number of like mechanistic reasons why that is. One of them is having high androgens, again, even high normal, but especially like, you know, when you're talking, when you get your total test levels done and they're not, it says like it doesn't register because you're like at 6,000, right? You can imagine how much more so this affects what I'm talking about here. But there are receptors in the liver called LDL receptors that are actually responsible for removing LDL from the blood, right? And high androgens will reduce the proliferation of those receptors, right? So basically you have less of those receptors. The function, like their activity, is reduced. So they don't remove LDL. LDL is low density lipoprotein, which is what we call the bad cholesterol, right? So you want to get as much of that out of your blood as you can, right? Because that's the stuff that leads to plaque buildup in your arteries and causes us to eventually have heart attacks or whatever else, you know? So there's that. That's one side of it, is that the LDL gets out of whack. But there's also some activity that messes with the conversion of HDL, which is the high density lipoprotein, from HDL2 to HDL3. That's directly a result of high androgens, right? So it's a reason, something about having androgens in your blood does this, prevents HDL from converting to the more effective particle size that can actually clear the LDL to help clear the LDL from the blood. Well, at least bring it back. And now it's not going to actually be removed a lot of times because we're also having the issue with the LDL receptors. So there's both sides of it. It jacks everything up, right? So it seems like sort of a hopeless situation, but it's really not. There's things you can do to help. Obviously, one of the things is drugs. People use statins. A lot of people. I'm not a huge fan of statins myself. I've never been at the point where I actually 100% needed them, so I never took them. And I think, you know, I will say, like, right from the gate, if you need them, if you're that out of whack and you can't get it under control any other way, absolutely you need to take them. Same goes for blood pressure medication. I don't take blood pressure medication. I take tadalafil, you know, which cool. Yeah. There's all sorts of benefits to that, but like, you know, I think tadalafil is protective too. It seems there's a number of studies, these aren't humans, but in rats where they did like intentional kidney injury to the rats in one group, they gave tadalafil to, and it protected them. So it's protective, and there's a number of positive things that are sort of still developing and still bearing out in the literature with tadalafil. But, you know, it's not going to be as protective as some of these other like ARB drugs. Those are awesome, the things they can do. But again, if you don't need it, you don't want to introduce stuff that you don't need into the equation. I always err on the side of simplicity in that way. I don't need to take those, so I've never taken them. I've been able to get, like, I've had crazy blood pressure. Obviously, everyone who's done the stuff that we've done has at some point or another thrown like 160s and stuff, you know? And I mean, I went through periods where I was consistently throwing that, you know? And now I'm in the teens every morning, you know? And some of the stuff, I have some strategies that I've used that have helped me a lot. One of the things is EPA, like the omega-3. So I use two things. I use, there's a product called Wiley's fish oil. Awesome. Wiley's has a product called Peak EPA. So it's like supposedly 1,000 milligrams of active omega-3s per capsule or whatever, but it's 750 of EPA and the rest is DHA, which is good because it looks like those two things work together to some degree. And one of the biggest benefits to supplementing with EPA, which is also, I want to say before I forget, there's a great product that's a prescription product called Vasipa, VASCEPA. And like, you can get that from your doctor, and it's basically purified fish oil. So some of the issues you run into with different fish oils is some of them have PCBs in them, some of them have mercury, things like that, right? Not just that, there's also an oxidization that can happen where they become rancid if they're exposed to heat or if they're stored incorrectly, and they can actually cause cardiovascular harm. So it's important to know what you're getting. You know, I wouldn't just take a random fish oil supplement, but something like Wiley's is a great product, and I actually have contacted them directly through email, and they were responsive to me. They gave me the TOTOX score, which that's what you really want for any fish oil supplement, is the TOTOX score. That's how much oxidation has occurred. But one of the benefits, you know, like to that point, because it's constantly oxidizing. So anybody listening, keep your fish oil in the fridge.
Yeah.
Because if you want it to last, that's all there is to it. It should be refrigerated. So one of the benefits to EPA, aside from like, because it may not even bear out that it directly, if you look at just HDL, LDL, trigs, it'll affect trigs. It'll help with trigs big time, right? Which that's a big thing to consider, because that ratio of triglycerides to HDL is a big indicator of how much arteriosclerotic plaque is being built up. They've said that like scores of, if it's a 3 times ratio, so if it's a 3-to-1 ratio, meaning like say you have 50 HDL, but you have 150, you know, that means you're accumulating plaque quickly. You know, so that's 3 times. That means you're actually rapidly accumulating arteriosclerotic plaque. But if you can get it down to half that, like 1.5 ratio, that would be like 50 HDL, 75 trigs, that you're not accumulating additional plaque. Like that is, I think they refer to it as stasis. As they say, like where it's not it's not getting any worse. It's stable, right? So that's awesome. Like for something like that, it's not like you can reverse aging, but if you can stop adding to the problem of, you know, things that are irreparable, essentially, you know, that's one thing. So that's a big plus. But the other thing is that you won't be able to really see this unless you pay a lot of extra money for the test. But there is something called OXLDL, right? Which is the oxidized LDL. And that is by far the best indicator of what is going to actually go to arteriosclerotic plaque buildup, because that seems to correlate better than regular LDL. By itself is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, but that oxidized LDL is a big thing, and it's been shown in several RCTs that EPA can prevent or at least reduce the amount of oxidization of LDL. And since that LDL is not being taken out of our blood for the reasons I explained earlier, at least not at the rate that it should be, it's more likely to oxidize. And that could be one of the reasons why guys in our position tend to have so many issues with cardiovascular stuff, even when their blood work seems to be in range. You know? So even when they have decent LDL ratio, like if you just look at the HDL LDL ratio, their score is okay. They have like a 3 or something, you know. Even when that's the case, you see people that are still, suddenly you find out, oh, this guy's got heart disease, or he always took care of his stuff, you know. So there's so many things that are sort of, it's very difficult. Like you can't always see right away what the issue is. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm starting to realize, like one of those things, the oxidized LDL is a big thing like that. Have you ever heard anyone talk about that?
What?
Yeah, it's very rare, right?
Yeah.
Like, so like most people that do what we do, like if you talk to them about like what is LDL, like they don't even know what that is. They know it's like, oh, that's bad cholesterol.
Yeah.
But like they couldn't tell you what it even is. And that's like, these are things that like, if you're going to be involved in this, especially in a long-term aspect, like you have to have a basic understanding of these things and learn how to keep these things in check. Because they're not looking at it, like if you don't check it, it's not bad. I've heard people say stuff like that before. Same thing with blood pressure. Like if I don't check it, it's not high. Like, no, dude, it's high. You just don't know if you don't check it. You're still getting.
Well, a few things to kind of play into that is, you know, in my 20s, I probably didn't give a fuck enough to even really care. Yeah. You know, until something happens to where you care. And things are different today than it was back then as well. Because anytime you went to see a doctor, it didn't matter what you went in for. You could have need stitches, but that was because of the testosterone that you were on. I know, dude. You know, so it was kind of like everything. But with companies like Marek Health now, and you know, sponsor of the podcast, link in the description.
Thank God for that stuff.
And it's available now for, just people that just want the basic TRT, but also people that are trying to mitigate effects of excess dose of the TRT. And it's definitely better today than 20 years ago, because let's be honest, a lot of those things we'd wear as a badge of honor. Like, dude, you're ready. You're fucking purple. Yeah. You can barely breathe.
Your HDL 0.
Yeah, everything's fucking good. You're gonna lift well.
All kidding aside, I've heard people brag about having a single digit HDL like it was an achievement. Because you know what that means.
Well, exactly.
It's like,
yes.
Yeah.
But when I think that when that started to pivot is when the word optimization started to come in.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Because then all of a sudden it was, the way that we optimized, I guess, was just more. Right. But then you start to figure out, when all these things are working synergistically and working together, your stuff works better.
Yeah.
Now that catches people's attention real quick because
performance enhancement.
Yeah, because now you start thinking maybe you can be one of those, responders that just blow up on little bits of shit.
Yeah. I think that most people end up doing 2 or 3 times the amount that they need to, because they don't do things like take breaks. They don't mitigate the risks with other stuff. And like, one thing people don't understand is if your liver is not healthy, like if your liver's not functioning the way it should, gear doesn't work the way you want it to, period. Like a lot of growth factors, your liver's responsible for that stuff. So without taking that period of time and allowing that stuff to sort of reboot, for lack of a better term, right, and getting into normal physiological ranges with all of your hormonal stuff, without that, being a regular part of the deal, like you're actually just unnecessarily taxing your body, right? And you're not getting results that you could get. Like, it's not like, I think a lot of people could probably get away with doing a third of what they're doing if they took periods of time and went down to extended periods of, and it's just fear. It's just, you don't know. It's kind of like what we're talking about. Like, where even me, I was saying, like, I was kind of, what kept me from doing this with all my clients with the hypertrophy stuff was that I was like, I don't know, what if something goes wrong? And that's people's entire careers in these competitive sports that are in untested divisions. It's like, well, I don't know. Last time I did this much, maybe I should do more, or at least that much. That's going to be necessary.
Well, the one thing that I still see is they'll do their blood work, but they're going to do it in the off season when they're not blasting.
Right. People I know that are smart people. It's so sad. I hear them say stuff like that. I'm like, dude, come on, man. Like, what is that going to tell you?
Exactly. I mean, you need to know both, right? Because then you'll know how far.
When it stops going back to normal, it's too late.
Yes.
But you need to know what's going on in your normal state, which if these guys that are doing 6-month blasts, which is, it's like the lion's share of people, they don't know what their values look like in that most of the time. That's your normal state.
Yeah.
At least for the next 10 years or however long you're going to do this, that's your normal state. And it cuts careers short that it doesn't need to, like where people could last a lot longer and get to higher levels of development, because although the effects don't increase as the dose, it's not a dose dependent. There's not a linear, at least, dose dependent increase in effects, like in terms of positive effects. The side effects definitely do increase. So, when you get into guys talking about grams, like 1 gram, 3 grams, 5 grams, like the guy, there's no question in your mind who the guy with 5 grams is. And it's not because he has better muscles or something, right? It's because he's purple.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff can be combated, counteracted, and nobody likes to talk about this stuff. Like, it's not something I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Some people do like to talk about this stuff, but I'm not somebody who like gets off on talking about it. I'm like, think it's cool, or I don't think it's cool. You know what I mean? It's something that is happening. It's and I don't want to pretend that it's not. Well, and so like
the weird thing that it's kind of playing out now that I'm watching very interestingly is, you can mitigate, a lot of the side effects like what we were talking about, and that's all good, right? I mean, it's a big part of what Marek does, as well. But then I'll take that information, then I'll apply it to my, 23-year-old self, right? And while having
like in your head, you mean?
Yeah, in my head. Like, okay, now if this was me then, and I could mitigate, say, the blood pressure, and stuff like that, I would just take more. Right. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
You mean because of where your head was at?
Yeah. Because
sure.
and now that was like a limiting factor,
right?
Because it gets so high, you pass out doing heavier lifts.
Right.
So now you're going to take that away.
Or be scared if you're smart, and realize like, oh, this is dangerous.
Yeah, and you're going to think I'm going to lower or keep the dose the same. No, I would, but I'm watching to see how that plays out, over time to be able to see.
Oh, where people go more crazy? I mean, look, based on what you're saying, I'll tell you, like, what I'm seeing right now is, people are doing insane amounts more than they did. I hate to do the whole, like, back in my day thing, but like, back in my day, like, and I was a national level competitor in bodybuilding, which at the time was like, that was the equivalent of, like, in the early 2000s, late 90s, that was like what pro is now. You know what I mean? There were like only a few pros every year, like, so the pro cards weren't like they are now. There was a couple a year, like 3, I think, in the United States, essentially shows that you could. And one of them was North Americans, which was at the time in Canada. So like there were people that were freaks that never, like Dave never turned pro. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I can tell you that the doses that these guys were doing then, like when I was competing, it's literally like a fifth of what it is now. And people that are less developed. And it's really just, it's like what you're talking about. People figured out like, oh, you can just take blood pressure meds and statins. Yeah. And do more. Yes. The thing is, like, you don't have to do more. No. You don't have to do more. And you're not like, the thing is, like, Kovacs, great example, right? I mean, like, he had plenty of side effects in terms of other things, but like, in terms of what he did, he didn't do any more than me or Dave or anyone else. Like, he wasn't doing crazy amounts. It wasn't like he did twice as much. He just could eat like no human being I've ever seen. He would sleep like 10 hours a day. And that's what it is. That's the difference, is the consistent sleeping, the consistent eating. And like, the thing is also, I feel like I came from a time where like, I didn't know. Like at that time, like if whatever someone told me that's what you're supposed to do, I was like, oh, I got to look at this guy. I guess I have to go with that being the truth. So I didn't have any reason to question, well, maybe I need more. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm like, well, he's not using more, so why would I need more? Look at him. You know what I mean? I knew it was just a matter of doing more work, but now I think you're right. It's found its way in where people are using the pharmacological interventions to combat other side effects from other pharmacological interventions that they're taking, And that's one thing I can remember being young, and somebody that I was like a mentor said to me, like, you never want to have to take one drug to have to deal with the effects of another drug. And I was like, okay, well, that's a good rule. But obviously there's no way to completely avoid it, like with estrogen and things like that. But at least I had that. I'm grateful that I had people that at least pointed me in that direction. And like, it sucks because a lot of them are dead or, in, rough shape, like Greg's gone. Again, God rest his soul. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. And like, people say stuff like that, but I mean it. Like, he's the dude that like they talk about when like, he's the example of a nice person. Like, he was my hero before I ever met him. And we became like just good friends. And like, to the point where like he goes, no, like the saying, he gave you the shirt off his back. Like, he had a t-shirt, like it was a Bodzilla t-shirt. This is, of course, corny bodybuilding shit. And I was like, oh, that's a cool shirt, because it was like had something on it about like being freaky big, And I thought I was freaky big, so I was like 330, but I'm 6'2", He's 6'3", 4 something, what I mean? So he's like, oh, do you want it? And he like literally just pulls it off, like takes it off and gives it to me. He's like, no, take it. I'm like, no, dude, I don't. He's like, take it. And it's like, it was like a 6X. Yeah. Like, I'm not like, but I mean, I remember and it's just, that's the example of, he's the dude who would literally take his shirt off and give it to you if you liked it. He made more money probably than anyone in bodybuilding to that point. He was getting like $10,000 to guest pose. Like, he was doing stuff like that. And he had, at one point he was in Muscle Mag, all of those. I don't know if you remember this. There will be like those 6-page ad spreads for his the company that he was with, Muscle Tech. Yeah, he's the reason who Muscle Tech is. He literally is the reason that company became so popular, is because he was such a freak and no one had ever seen anything like it. So well known. But he was just such a nice guy that he literally would just pay for everything. Like, that's how he was. He was just like so generous, so nice, so kind, and it's a shame that he died so young. He was only 45. But these things are, I really do think these things are to a large degree or other avoidable if you address the things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't want to see the people that I care about die. There's no, and it's, I mean, you have to be aware of the dangers. So pretending that there's no danger is not going to make it go away.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be willing to do the stuff. Like you're talking about Marek Health stuff. Blood work is a big thing, man. Anybody that I work with that is a concern to me, I'm like, we need regular blood work. You need to always be monitoring this stuff, you know, and you need to be willing to make changes if it's not where it should be.
And where do you see the compliance with that?
Maybe about half the time they make the meaningful changes. Probably about half the time. Yeah, I would say. So like if I think of like 10 people, like I'd say probably like 4 or 5 of them actually get their blood work back in check because they see that it's messed up. Other ones will say, oh, well, I bought this supplement. Like you can't, it's not like, you know, everybody knows a fat person that has a gym membership. And that's like they're paying, it's like their tithe to church or something. Like I have a membership, but like that doesn't do it. You know what I mean? You can't just buy a supplement and take that and think that's going to solve everything. It's not. It has to be part of a constellation of actions that are moved in the direction of improving that stuff. It can't be a single thing. You know, like I was talking about EPA, that's good. That's helpful. And there's lots of things. Nattokinase, very helpful. Actually, there's one study where nattokinase was shown to regress plaque 3 times as much as a statin. I think it was simvastatin, and they did a side-by-side comparison. So that's crazy, right? Also, nattokinase is a fibrinolytic enzyme that doesn't prevent your blood from clotting, but it breaks down those fibrins, right? So it's an enzyme that breaks down clots. Which you have clots in your body. I have clots in my body right now. There's always some small amount. Problem is when those things, you know, something gets released and they get together, or, you know, they hit the heart or hit the lungs, and then we're cooked. And then it's lights out. So there's things you can do. There's things that if you're in a higher risk situation with, like we were talking about, where you see that you have issues with hematocrit or red blood cell stuff, you know, there's things you can do to protect. It's not saying that that's 100%, but it's a lot better than not doing anything or not looking or pretending that everything's going to be okay. You know, I'll just say this. I wrote because I got this question. I put the box up on my story on Instagram, you know, like once in a while. I used to do it once a week, but it's just too much. It's too annoying when it's the same questions. So. But I don't want to just be like, okay, well, here's the answer somewhere. I like having people have the opportunity to ask the question, so I just do it less frequently now. But that was a big thing, was like, oh, well, what could I talk about various supplements here and there, you know? Like, what do you take? So I wrote an article that it's barely an article. It's just everything that I take every day in terms of like a longevity, cardiovascular protection. And why I take each thing, like what I'm thinking. You know, because like we were saying before, like I'm willing to let people, if somebody wants to pick a movement and they think that's better, okay, well, I just want to know why. Like, what's your thinking? So at least I give my thinking. And none of it is imaginary. None of it is just like wishful thinking. Like we're like, oh, well, I hope this will do this. It's like I have a reason for believing everything that I say, you know? And anybody that's curious or wants more information why I think that, reach out to me. I'm happy to walk them through everything that I've read on it or what my understanding of it is. You know, knowing that my understanding is always potentially flawed or could be better. You know what I mean? But it's better than not knowing anything at all.
Yeah. It's
better than like we were talking about, like, you know, what's an LDL? Like, what is that? There's plenty of people that are like, yeah, that's the bad stuff. No, it's the same as the good stuff. It's just a different size.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most, you know? Most people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
Man, I don't know. No, I think that's about it, right? This has been a good conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking at the notes here. Looks like you covered it. So how would somebody go about finding you? What's the best way?
fitset.black is my website. So, there's...
And with what you were talking about there, your blog post is right there on that front page.
You can't miss it. Yeah, it says Swede's cardio protective regimen.
Yeah, it's really hard to miss.
Yeah, you can't miss it. Yeah, so there's that, and there's the new templates, which they haven't dropped yet, but they probably by the time this airs they will. So,
okay.
And so there's that, and I updated the CERT course recently, the coaching certification course. We did one of those here, the first one we did here. So I updated it to include how to maneuver that stuff with your clients, like how to work those templates in, what's the purpose of it and so forth, to give a little bit better of an understanding to how that would work within the context of the FitSet methodology, like under that umbrella. So
any final thoughts?
Nah, man, it's good to see you. It's good to be here. It's been a long time. I haven't been out here since what? I guess it's been at least 2 years.
It's 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming out again. And with that said, we're done.
Yeah, man. Cool.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, or here for more videos.